paramedics carried her on a stretcher. Without any solid leads, this case remained unsolved for 10 years, leaving families in a state of uncertainty. The twisted details led to years of back and forth, with hope fading as the case went cold. However, when the truth finally emerged, it brought forth many shocking revelations. An innocent, youthful, and promising woman had been murdered in cold blood. Her body was discovered a few hundred yards from a faintly illuminating streetlight on a once familiar bike path. The initial report of the incident to the police was given by Michael McDuff Chalbert, a 26-year-old man. He'd also mentioned that he tried to resuscitate Shanique. No obvious signs of struggle were found at the site, nor were any witnesses present, suggesting an isolated and cruelly efficient attack.
Right on set! Just another 83 days, and then we're done.
God, this is so rewarding.
Why are we shooting so?
Right, what a mess.
Can we internalize our panic?
Not panicking. Take 5, everyone!
The franchise, streaming exclusively on Max.
Steve Madden, never miss a beat.
Shanique was then rushed to the hospital, where she subsequently succumbed to her injuries. Her skull, having been fractured by a savage blow to the head with a blunt object, likely a metal or iron bar, had signaled the torment that the family and society would face for the next decade. The forensic team had rushed to the scene and combed the area for any possible evidence. Soil samples, the imprint of a leaf, and other evidence were gathered carefully. Her clothes were analyzed for fiber evidence, and her body was taken for a thorough examination to determine the cause of death. Everything was meticulously recorded, down to the minutest detail, for further reference. Several people, regardless of whether they were neighbors, friends, relatives, co-workers, or last shift workers in offices near the crime scene, were interrogated. There was no stone left unturned with reference to finding the possible leads. Every possible piece of information about Shanique, like telephone calls, receipts, and each and every click made on any of the social sites, was scrutinized diligently. The case of Shanique Dalcour turned icy cold after a decade. Hope dwindled as leads vanished. Investigators hit a brick wall, and the case file was gathering dust. But a flicker of hope ignited with advancements in forensics, offering a chance to finally break the silence, though justice continued to evade them. The murder case was left unsolved for almost 10 years, with the file finally opening again in 2024. The modernization of criminalistics provided a solution. The cops returned to the scene of the crime, reviewing the evidence, and a long time later, a solution was found. The apprehension of Michael McDuff Chalbert was the turning point in the case. The same man who had once been locked up and considered to be a suspect was now a criminal. For the police department, it felt like déjà vu, but this time it was backed up by evidence. The chief inspector of the SPAL, Pierre Duquette, however, explained at a press conference that specific methods in the field of forensic sciences have allowed them to progress in this investigation and to obtain additional elements allowing the DPCP to file charges against the suspect. Our priority has always been to seek the truth in this matter in order to offer answers to Shanique's family and allow them to begin their grieving process, Duquette said, assuring that resolving this matter was part of SPAL's priorities from the very beginning. However, to prevent the hearing of the new evidence from interfering with the continuation of legal procedures, more information was not revealed about the new evidence. As far as the mechanisms of protecting the judicial process, new elements that the SPAL didn't wish to discuss allowed the Director of Criminal and Penal Prosecutions, DPCP, to lay charges in this case more than 9 years after the fact.
At Vistaprint, we print signs so people can see your brand up close. But we also print signs so that people can see your business here, see it here, and see it here, so you stand out, even when they're...
The decade-old case of Shanique Dalcour finally reached a resolution. In May 2024, Michael McDuff Chalbert, now 35, was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The breakthrough came after years of painstaking forensic analysis. Evidence that was once inconclusive yielded new results thanks to advancements in technology. The arrest was a defining moment in the efforts made by the investigating team in search of the culprit. Thus, the public, which had long ago switched its attention, was suddenly jolted and reminded. This was a plus for the family of Janique Dalcourt, as it marked a certain level of achievement for what the family desired. But it was also a drawback, the sting of a dagger, and a memory of their loss. The chief inspector of the SPAL, Pierre Duquette, said, "The SPAL spared no effort and used all the resources at its disposal to ensure that charges were filed in relation to the murder of Janique Dalcourt, and that her murderer be brought before the courts to answer the charge of murder in the first degree filed against him." Thus, the case was an example of an unyielding strive for justice, no matter the difficulties encountered. The trial was a harrowing ordeal for the Dalcourt family, a relentless reliving of their worst nightmare. In May 2024, after a decade of torment, a verdict was finally reached. When Julie Vincent, the Crown prosecutor, and the Crown found Michael McDuff Jalbert guilty of first-degree murder, justice was finally served.
Worked very hard to analyze the evidence in the file. We had the file analyzed for a lot of weeks. So we are confident that we're reasonably able to make the evidence without a reasonable doubt.
On May 15, 2024, Duquette offered heartfelt condolences to Janique's parents, Monique Dalcourt and John Gandolfo, commending their extraordinary resilience. He also acknowledged the tireless efforts of the police force, civilian staff, the DPCP, and forensic experts who contributed to the case. At the Longueuil courthouse on May 15th, John Gandolfo, accompanied by his wife, spoke to reporters, expressing the family's enduring pain. He acknowledged that nothing could ever bring their daughter back, but the family finds some comfort in knowing that the person responsible will face justice. Even though justice served is bittersweet, it was the closure of a chapter for the family that had endured such pain that was almost unimaginable. The death of Janique was a scar that would never fade away, and as much as the conviction moved the spirits of the people and strengthened their faith, it also gave the families a tiny consolation in a tragedy that would never end. In a moving service after the verdict was delivered, the Dalcourt family placed a plaque dedicated to Janique, their daughter. People gathered to mourn her, and it was evident that they still cherished her presence, even though she was no longer around. This fact speaks volumes about the value of Janique's life and the loss incurred. Time may heal, but the void left by Janique remains eternal. On October 5th, 2016, tragedy struck in a small building in Edmond, central Oklahoma, when the body of a 19-year-old college student was found. The victim, identified as Jennifer Kylie Malloy, was found on the floor of her apartment in the afternoon that day. 1978, he moved back to Nebraska, his home state, where he lived a quiet life until he passed away in 2002 without ever facing justice for his crimes. Regarding motive, Drexler speculates that Chudamelka may have been enraged after losing money to Anne in a poker game. The $50 she won from him had been taken from her pockets, and Chudamelka paid his rent 2 days later with 5 $20 bills. Although Drexler noted that there was no way to confirm if the rent was paid with the stolen money, it remains a possibility. On June 8, 2024, Drexler revealed in a press conference that Chudamelka's DNA was found on all the buttons of Anne's shirt and on the inside of her pants. This evidence indicated that Chudamelka had removed the pants, thereby confirming beyond a reasonable doubt that he was responsible for both the assault and the murder.
I may not always love you, but as long
The pants that you can see here, they were white and blue, but when you're looking at the blue portion there, that is the inside of the pants. That is the inside of the pants. It's very, very important to recognize this because this would be brought up in court if Doug was alive today. The pants, when they were removed, the right leg went inside out. The left leg did not. So when Anne is strangled with her pant leg, it's the inside of her pant leg. So if you're at a bar setting, where you can brush against people, you can do transfer DNA. If your pants are inside out, it's impossible to have DNA on the inside.
Additionally, Chudamelka's DNA was found on a glass and on the seat next to where Anne had been sitting just before she was murdered. Detective Drexler stated that if Chudamelka were still alive, he would have faced the consequences of his actions.
If Doug was still alive, he died in 2002, I would certainly ask for an arrest warrant to go to Fremont, Nebraska, and arrest Doug for this crime. There is enough probable cause at this point to charge him with the murder of Ann Woodward from March 2nd, 1973.
Officials announced that Chudamelka's DNA will be entered into the CODIS system, a comprehensive network of local, state, and national DNA databases used for tracking convicted offenders. Once Ann Woodward's case is officially closed, this will enable law enforcement agencies across the country to investigate Chudamelka's potential involvement in other unsolved cases. Ann Woodward's granddaughter, Annie Dalton, represented the Woodward family at the press conference, expressing their gratitude to the authorities for finally providing answers after 5 decades of waiting.
I've thanked everybody for me. I just, on behalf of the Woodward family, I want to say thank you so much for carrying a sickle and look for that. And thank you for both agencies for putting aside any history that prevented that collaborative effort. I think this closure has been a long time coming, and I just want to thank all of you that were involved.
Anne's eldest and the last surviving child, Leslie Woodward Estes, who was 18 when her mother was killed, acknowledged that the answers will not bring them full closure.
There's no closure for me. It's still going to go on. She's still going to be gone tomorrow, and my children have never seen her, and they'll never know what a wonderful grandmother she would have been.
But she is relieved that the rumors about her father can now be put to rest.
It broke his heart, but it broke our family. The splinter never was healed.
Perhaps now, the healing process can finally begin. On the fateful morning of May 24th, 1982, 7th grade student Sarah Ann Gear was discovered deceased under unusual circumstances behind an apartment building on Main Street in Cloverdale, California. She was found partially undressed, strangled, bearing bruises and traumatic injuries that suggested she'd been subjected to cruel torment. Surprisingly, despite the atrocious nature of the murder, the case remained unsolved for over 42 years. On Saturday, May 22nd, 1982, 13-year-old Sarah went to a friend's house to spend the weekend. Her mother, Susan Gear, expected her home the next day, but when Sarah didn't arrive, she assumed she was simply staying an extra night there. By the morning of May 24th, Susan was preparing for Sarah's return, excited to get her ready for school. Little did she know that her world was about to be shattered forever by a horrific incident she could never have imagined, even in her worst nightmare. As the hours ticked by, there was no sign of Sarah, and her anxiety had turned into dread. With a sinking heart, she headed to the Cloverdale police station and reported Sarah missing. As the police began their investigation, they were quickly led to a chilling discovery a mere 2 blocks from Sarah's home. A local had reported that a girl's body had been found behind an apartment building on North Main Street. When authorities arrived, they were met with a harrowing scene. A young girl's undressed and strangled body was partially hidden under a fence, showing clear signs of severe trauma and bruises. Witnesses revealed that a 6-year-old boy playing nearby had stumbled upon the body first and, horrified, alerted others. The victim was identified as Sarah Ann Gear, who had been reported missing that very morning by her mother. The body was discovered near the entrance of an alley off 2nd Street. At the crime scene, police meticulously examined the area. They'd noticed dirt on Sarah's body and drag marks on the ground. So they searched the nearby alley and found crucial links. Marks in the loose dirt indicated that Sarah had been killed there and then dragged to where her body was found. Her shoes were neatly arranged at the end of the alley, further confirming the grim and premeditated sequence of events. As investigators collected evidence and sent the body for autopsy, Sarah's mother was delivered the devastating news. Her world shattered into pieces as she struggled to grasp the horrifying reality that her cherished daughter had been so viciously murdered. As the investigation progressed, authorities interviewed Sarah's friend, with whom Sarah had stayed on May 22nd. But she revealed a startling detail. Sarah had not stayed the night of May 23rd at her place, but instead had returned home. Her parents also confirmed that Sarah had stayed with them until the evening of May 23rd. Then they dropped her off at her house around 9 p.m., but hadn't seen her enter the house. Authorities began to suspect that Sarah had gone somewhere else that night. So they interviewed her other friends and learned that instead of heading home, Sarah had walked to an arcade on Cloverdale Boulevard to meet another friend. Locals near the arcade reported seeing her around 10 p.m., but no one knew what happened after that. Based on this information, investigators concluded that Sarah was likely killed after midnight, as a police officer patrolling the area between 11 p.m. and 12 a.m. confirmed that nothing amiss was reported that night. Meanwhile, the autopsy report that was released revealed a harrowing truth. Sarah had died from traumatic injuries caused by beating and strangulation. The most disturbing revelation was that she'd been assaulted before being viciously killed. Medical examiners collected and preserved blood and male bodily fluid samples from Sarah's body for further analysis. The horrific news of the murder had shaken the entire community, prompting investigators to ramp up their efforts. Initially, the investigation gained significant momentum as police interviewed numerous eyewitnesses and suspects, including Sarah's friends, and administered polygraph tests. However, what was assumed to be promising leads ultimately led to nothing. Without physical evidence connecting any suspects to the crime, the case grew cold, leaving Sarah's mother in deep despair as she continued to yearn for justice for her beloved daughter. Born on February 13, 1969, in downtown San Francisco, California, Sarah Ann Gear was raised by her mother, Susan Gear, as a single parent following her parents' separation.
My goal in life is to put as much cheese into people's mouths as possible.
By 1982, Sarah was living with her mother in a small yellow house on East 4th Street in Cloverdale, Sonoma County. A 7th grade student at Washington Junior High School, Sarah was known for her brightness and socially pleasant nature, always eager to make friends and spend time with them. To ensure for a better future for Sarah, Susan worked as a nurse at Manzanita Manor. But all her dreams and hopes for her daughter were shattered by the tragic incident. The most distressing part for her was that, even after years, the perpetrator remained at large, and she feared the case might never be resolved. Yet, fate had other plans, and justice for Sarah would eventually be served. Nearly 4 decades later, in 2019, Cloverdale Police Department Chief Jason Ferguson decided to reopen the case and initially consulted with an investigative firm. However, the reopening was delayed due to the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. In July 2021, Chief Jason personally restarted the investigation, relying on modern forensic technology to shed new light on the decades-old cold case. He carefully reviewed old evidence and conducted new interviews. Shortly thereafter, he retired in December 2023, and Chief Chris Parker took over the case. Chief Chris along with private investigator Kevin Kline and Cloverdale detective Katie Vanoni, continued on with the quest for justice. For almost 2 years, the CPD, Glenn County Sheriff's Office, FBI, Seri Labs, Sonoma County District Attorney's Office, and detectives worked together in a coordinated effort to mobilize the full extent of the law. They revisited the DNA evidence on file and sent the preserved blood and bodily fluid samples to Seri Labs for advanced testing. Finally, in July 2024, utilizing modern DNA genetic genealogy technology, authorities made a breakthrough. The DNA match to a 62-year-old James Oliver Eunuch from Willows, California. However, the details about Eunuch and his connection to Sarah remain undisclosed to the public by the investigating authorities. Finally, after 42 years, on July 22, 2024, Eunuch was apprehended by the Cloverdale police and held at the Sonoma County Jail without bail. Eunuch was charged with murder, assault, kidnapping, and lewd and lascivious acts with a minor by force. As he awaits trial, authorities are confident that the legal system will deliver the appropriate punishment for his heinous crimes. When Sarah's relatives were informed about the development, they were deeply appreciative of finally receiving the long-awaited closure. Cloverdale Police Chief Parker said, "The arrest represents a bittersweet victory for justice. While nothing can undo the pain inflicted upon the Gear family in our community, we can finally offer some solace in knowing that the perpetrator will be held accountable." Cloverdale Mayor Todd Lands also commented that they stood united in solidarity with the Gear family as they witnessed the culmination of years of hard work and perseverance by the law enforcement officials. He also said that the arrest signified not only a step towards closure, but also a reiteration of their commitment to ensuring safety and justice for all in Cloverdale. On a warm summer evening in 2010, in the quiet suburbs of Gainesville, Florida, a night like any other turned into a nightmare for the Oxenius family. 16-year-old Sebastian Oxenius was doing what many teens do, playing video games in the comfort of his own home. But the peace was shattered when Sebastian was suddenly fatally shot, an unprovoked act that left his family and community in shock. For nearly 14 years, his loved ones and neighbors had been haunted by the memory of his death, grappling with unanswered questions. On June 29, 2010, Sebastian Oxenius spent hours helping his brother Boris Oxenius move into his new house. Later that evening, Sebastian's friend Brian Hull came over, ready for a fun night of gaming and hanging out. As the evening turned into night, Sebastian and Brian became deeply absorbed in a popular video game. They had a great time playing, but as the game became more challenging, Sebastian grew frustrated. Deciding to take a break, he stepped away from the console to look up some online tips that might help him get past the tough spots. Little did they know, this ordinary night of gaming would soon take a tragic turn. At 3:40 a.m., Sebastian walked through the kitchen, still determined to give the game another try. As he was heading towards the computer, everything changed. An unknown assailant had slipped in through an unlocked side door and was hiding behind the kitchen counter. Sebastian had no idea that danger was lurking just a few feet away. As he moved toward the hall, which was too close to the kitchen, the attacker suddenly sprang from the shadows. Without any warning or provocation, the assailant attacked Sebastian. Despite his best efforts to fight back, the house was soon filled with the deafening sound of gunshots. The peaceful night was shattered, and in those tragic moments, the Oxenius family's world was turned upside down forever. Brian, who was still absorbed in the game, heard the chilling sound, but didn't realize it was a gunshot and dismissed it as just another noise. In the comfort and safety of Sebastian's home, the idea of such violence seemed unimaginable. It wasn't until he heard Sebastian's parents' panicked calls to 911 that he understood something was terribly wrong. Sebastian's father, Boris Sr., hearing the gunshots, rushed downstairs toward the kitchen. With a pounding heart, he dashed through the hall, but by the time he reached his son, it was too late. Sebastian was found on the kitchen floor, covered in blood and fighting for his life. Poor senior rushed to his side and desperately tried to stop the bleeding. With trembling hands, he pressed against the wounds. In those agonizing moments, his love and efforts were powerless against the senseless violence that had claimed his son's life. Sebastian was a vibrant and promising young man, deeply cherished by his family. He was a dedicated student at Buchholz High School, excelling academically and consistently ranking near the top of his class. Outside the classroom, he found joy in wrestling, where his determination and hard work made him a standout athlete who was often described as methodical and focused. The shock of the tragedy was so serious that no one could understand what terrible motive had compelled someone to take the life of such a vibrant, fun-loving boy. The Alachua County Sheriff's Office launched an intensive investigation, determined to unravel the mystery behind the senseless act of violence that shattered the peaceful Gainesville community. With little to go on initially, detectives pursued every lead tirelessly. They meticulously examined every piece of evidence and interviewed witnesses and Sebastian's friends as they tried to find if anyone had any kind of hatred or jealousy towards him which might explain the attack. But everyone they spoke to confirmed the same thing, that Sebastian was a gentle person with no enemies. Despite the diligent efforts of law enforcement, the case soon grew cold, leaving Sebastian's family and friends devastated with grief. Alachua County Sheriff's spokesman, Lieutenant Steve Maynard, expressed the department's frustration. A few days after the shooting, we were at a standstill. We had nothing. No viable leads, no suspects, no motive, not even a clue about how the shooter escaped. As with many unsolved cases, Sebastian's tragic death soon faded from the public's eyes. The reward for information eventually grew to $20,000, but tips began to dwindle. The community's hopes started to dim, and the case seemed destined to remain a haunting mystery. Yet this was not the end of Sebastian's story. In 2021, a glimmer of hope emerged in the long-dormant case as investigators uncovered new evidence. This breakthrough, though not disclosed in detail, provided a crucial piece of the puzzle that had evaded authorities for over a decade. With renewed determination, they began piecing together the intricate details of the crime, inching closer to identifying the perpetrator responsible for Sebastian's untimely death. Months of relentless investigation went by, leading to a significant development. A suspect emerged with ties to Central Florida. Timothy Thomas, 33 years old and already serving a life sentence for unrelated charges, became the prime suspect in Sebastian's case. Thomas's criminal history painted a disturbing picture of a man with a penchant for violence. Following his arrest in Orlando in 2011 for armed robbery, kidnapping, and drug charges, he was sentenced to 4 years in prison. However, Thomas's troubles didn't end there. Court records revealed he violated parole shortly after his release by failing to notify his parole officer of a change in residence. This led to a warrant for his arrest. In 2015, a fateful encounter in Monroe County escalated when Thomas, driving a car with stolen plates, opened fire on a deputy attempting to stop him. Miraculously, the deputy survived the ordeal thanks to protective gear. Finally, in December 2023, a major development occurred in the Sebastian Oxenius case when Timothy Thomas was indicted by a grand jury for burglary and the fatal slaying of Sebastian while still being engaged in trafficking. He's currently held in the Alachua County Jail on a hefty $1 million bond. The case took a dramatic twist as Thomas's court-appointed public defender withdrew, citing an irreconcilable conflict of interest, adding intrigue to the proceedings. Meanwhile, law enforcement found a lead during their new investigation and intensified their efforts to locate a woman who had reportedly loaned Thomas her car in 2010. It was supposed that possibly she would have been present during Sebastian's tragic murder. This crucial search highlighted a potential key witness whose cooperation could shed light on the events of that fateful night. However, Sheriff Emery Gainey emphasized that law enforcement did not believe the woman who loaned Timothy Thomas her car in 2010 had any prior knowledge of his alleged actions that night. Gainey appealed to the public for help in locating her, describing her as Hispanic, very short, and around 19 or 20 years old with a heavy build at the time. The vehicle in question was identified as a white or cream-colored Kia Sportage or a similar model. Gainey stressed that the woman was not considered a suspect and assured the community that she was not in trouble Rather, they simply wished to speak with her to gather more information related to Sebastian's tragic murder, hoping to uncover crucial details that could lead to further progress in the case. For Sebastian's family, the period of 14 years had been marked by enduring anguish, each day filled with the painful absence of their beloved son. Boris Sr., Sebastian's father, expressed his hope to one day confront Timothy Thomas and ask him the haunting question, why? The pain of their loss goes beyond any desire for retribution. It's a deep ache that resonates through every moment. During a poignant press conference on February 5, 2024, Boris reflected on the tragedy, emphasizing how their home, once a place of safety for Sebastian as a 16-year-old, became a scene of horror. Despite the difficult journey, they found solace in the pursuit of justice for their son, a step towards healing amidst unimaginable grief.
You got just 1 hour to love me before I catch that midnight train. Just 1 hour to love me. Now, baby, don't you dare complain. I know it.
Sorry about that.
Almost 30 years ago, a man's actions set off a chain of events that would tragically impact the lives of many women. This story begins with a disappearance that shocked the world. In May 2010, Shannon Gilbert disappeared, sparking a high-profile search. While looking for her, investigators found much more than they expected. Their investigation would reveal the tragic deaths of several other women, including Jessica Taylor, whose remains were found in Manorville in 2008, while the other parts of her body were found in Jilgo Beach in 2011. This horrifying discovery also brought up a case from 1993 involving a victim named Sandra Costilla, who was viciously murdered. In their search to uncover the person responsible for these terrible acts, investigators would learn what led to such gruesome ends for these individuals and how all of them were connected. Let's explore the lives of these young women and uncover the tragic ends that marked their lives. Sandra Costilla was born on the 25th of August 1965 in Trinidad and Tobago to Ramkissoon R. Rajkumar and Molly E. Rattensingh. She later moved to New York City in the United States. In New York, she had an unstable home life and was often on the move. Her last known address was in Queens. She had some legal problems, including an arrest in 1992 for jumping a subway turnstile, which led to her fingerprints being taken. These fingerprints helped police identify her body when it was found. Sandra Costilla's body was discovered on November 21, 1993 by 2 hunters who were in a wooded area in North Sea, Southampton. Upon stumbling upon her remains, they called the police to investigate. The body had been left there for several days before it was found. Next, we turn our attention to Jessica Taylor. She was a 20-year-old sex worker known to operate in the area around Midtown Manhattan. On July 21, 2003, Jessica Taylor disappeared. Her remains were first found in July 2003 in a wooded area in Manorville, Long Island, by a woman walking her dog. When the investigation began, many details about these women came to light. For instance, in November 1993, when Sandra Costilla's body was discovered, it was found partially clothed and had been exposed to the environment for several days, which affected its condition. As the investigation progressed, it became clear that these cases were part of a larger pattern. Understanding the context of the victims' lives and the circumstances of their deaths set the stage for uncovering the identity of a possible suspect behind these crimes. This killer had a specific way in which he carried out these 2 murders with a very precise way of dumping these bodies. He placed each body at an exact distance from each other. This means that a set pattern or plan was followed for where to leave each victim's body. During the examination of Jessica's body, investigators found male human hair on a surgical drape underneath her body. These hairs were from someone with Caucasian or European characteristics, but were unsuitable for DNA testing. In March 2011, additional remains of Jessica were discovered at Jilgo Beach, including her skull, hands, and forearm. Sandra's murder case grew cold due to the limited physical evidence and a lack of witnesses or suspects with direct ties to Sandra's murder. Over the passage of time, resources and attention shifted to newer cases, making it difficult for authorities to make progress on Costilla's case. The case didn't see any new breakthroughs until later, when digital evidence showed up. On the other hand, the investigation into the murder of Jessica Taylor also faced challenges with the evidence collected. As time passed, the case struggled with limited resources and shifting investigative priorities, making it difficult to maintain active leads and pursue new avenues effectively. The case remained unsolved for years, despite later developments, which included finding disturbing online searches by Huerman. Shannon Gilbert, a 23-year-old woman from Jersey City, went missing on May 1, 2010, after visiting a client she found on Craigslist in Oak Beach, Long Island. She made a frantic 911 call after she left her client's house around 5 a.m., saying, "There's somebody after me," before running to a neighbor's house for help. After stumbling and fleeing, she vanished before the police arrived. Her disappearance led to a search that uncovered the bodies of several other women, including further partial remains of Jessica, adding a chilling twist to the tale. In the days following Taylor's disappearance, a witness had reported seeing a dark-colored Chevrolet pickup truck in the wooded area where Taylor's body was later found. This was what led to Rex Huerman first being identified as a suspect in March 2022. Huerman had also purchased a 2002 dark-colored Chevrolet Avalanche pickup truck prior to her murder, but its exterior color differed from the vehicle seen by the witness. Further investigation revealed that Huerman had also searched online for a Newsday article about Taylor's remains shortly after her disappearance. According to court papers, in 2022, investigators carefully examined all the evidence in the case. They also found links to burner phones and other phone records they thought to be connected to Huerman. 59-year-old Rex Huerman was arrested on July 13, 2023, in connection with the unsolved serial killings of women found along Long Island's Gilgo Beach, as well as the earlier murders of Sandra Costilla and Jessica Taylor. Huerman was charged with multiple counts of first-degree murder for the deaths of several women whose bodies were discovered along Long Island's Gilgo Beach. He was arrested in connection with the murders of Melissa Barthelemy, Maureen Brainerd Baines, Megan Waterman, and Amber Lynn Costello, whose remains were found in close proximity to each other on Ocean Parkway. Evidence showed that Rex Huerman, who had been a suspect in multiple cases, also had a detailed planning document on a hard drive. The document had sections titled Problems, Supplies, DS or Dump Site, and TRG or Target, suggesting a methodical approach to carrying out and covering up crimes. On June 6, 2024, Huerman was charged with 2 more murders, Sandra Costilla and Jessica Taylor. He pleaded not guilty to both of these murders and is still awaiting trial in jail. Sandra Costilla's and Jessica Taylor's families have faced a heartbreaking journey since their loved ones disappeared. For years, they lived with the pain of not knowing what happened, holding on to hope that one day justice would come. Sandra Costilla's family struggled to keep her memory alive while tirelessly working with authorities to find answers. Jessica Taylor's family endured similar suffering, feeling a deep void and constant uncertainty. Despite the emotional toll, they leaned on each other for support, never losing hope that the truth would eventually come out. A year after Rex Huerman's arrest, his wife, Asa Ellerup, and their 2 children are still struggling to rebuild their lives.
They are collateral damage to the alleged actions of Rex Huerman. Whether they happened or did not happen, whether he's innocent or guilty, their lives are forever turned upside down.
Huerman's estranged wife wouldn't answer questions, only speaking briefly about her battle with cancer.
I'm not in remission yet. I have up to 3 years. Then the doctors will see if I'm in remission.
His wife filed for divorce and is now battling cancer. She's not publicly discussed the case, but has emphasized the family's status as collateral damage in the case, noting their sympathy for the victims. As we await the next steps in the trial, this development is an important reminder of the ongoing effort to find truth and bring those responsible to justice. The chase for justice remains a powerful reminder of our commitment to ensure there's no victim's story left untold and that every victim's voice is heard.
Today we're here in Washington, D.C., and we're asking tourists to take the Container Challenge.
On July 29, 1994, 21-year-old Angela Maher was hit by a drunk driver in the north area of Scottsdale, Arizona. Driver, who was arrested days after, suddenly vanished before her court hearing in 1995. In April 2024, 3 decades after Angela's death, police were finally able to piece together what happened that fateful day, but it wasn't an ending anyone would have expected. On Friday, July 29, 1994, Angela Maher was on her way to pick up a friend who didn't want to drive drunk from Styx, a bar on Camelback Road in Old Town Scottsdale, Phoenix. At 9:50 p.m., it was fairly late, so she decided to use her mother's white Oldsmobile sedan for the short trip. Angela turned right, heading south towards her destination, when a maroon van suddenly pulled out of thunder and lightning, a bar near Scottsdale Road and Shea Boulevard. The van suddenly drifted across the center line of the road, struck the hood of one vehicle before slamming head-on into Angela's car. The impact threw her body between the back seats and left her feet tangled in the pedals. By the time passers-by came to her rescue, she was already unconscious and bleeding profusely. A group of paramedics were called, but before they could remove Angela from the car, she passed away, having suffered a massive blunt force trauma to the head. However, the owner of the red Ford van survived and was still at the scene of the accident when police got there. Angela Marie Maher was born on January 29, 1973, to parents Rosemarie Funaro Maher and Donald Sr. John Maher. The family lived in Waterloo in Black Hawk County, Iowa. She and her older brother, Donald Jr., were close to their parents and each other. In 1990, her father died of cancer, and Angela took up the role of making her family happy as they moved to Scottsdale, Maricopa County, Arizona. Even as an adult, Angela still loved to bake cookies and prank her brother. The week of the accident, Angela was home from Creighton University in Omaha, Nebraska, where she was about to begin her senior year as a political science major. Since her brother was in law school in Michigan, she'd come into town that weekend to celebrate her mother's 57th birthday. During interviews, Angela's mother, Rosemarie Maher, expressed pain over what happened to her daughter. She told interviewers how Angela had promised she would be back home by midnight, so when 12 a.m. fell and her daughter was nowhere to be found, Rose started to worry. It was unlike her daughter to say something and not do it. It was 12:50 a.m. when the police came knocking and asked her if she had a white Oldsmobile. That's when her heart dropped.
And my question was my daughter okay? And they said no.
Days later, when she was burying her daughter, driver still hadn't been arrested. She called the county attorney from the funeral home, asking why nothing was being done about the case. Rose told journalists how her daughter had wanted to join the Foreign Service someday to see the world's great capitals. The portraits for her graduation from Creighton University had already been taken, but she would never live to see that day. After Angela was pronounced dead at 10:34 p.m. that night, police investigations started quickly after the accident. Arizona police soon found evidence pointing to a driving under the influence accident. Firefighter Dave Folio, who was part of the first group of firefighters that arrived at the scene after the accident, told police that when he got there, he saw a red van on the road, while a heavily damaged white car had veered to the west side. Since he didn't know what caused the accident, he ended up transporting the van driver, who had sustained a broken jaw. She told him about how she'd been drinking all day and smoked marijuana. True to her words, the woman had all the signs of impairment: woozy smell, bloodshot eyes, and slurred speech. Realizing that this woman had just killed someone, he documented her statement and filed it at the police station. When police retrieved the red van, they found identification documents pointing to 32-year-old Gloria Schultze as the car owner. Further investigation, plus the fire captain's statement, proved that she was the one who was driving the van that night, and she'd done so under the influence. Schultze was detained, after which a blood, urine, and breath test was done at Scottsdale Memorial Hospital. Results showed traces of marijuana in her system, as well as .159 alcohol content, which was nearly double the legal limit for driving in Arizona. She confessed to police that she'd drunk 3 or 4 beers at a local bar just before she started driving. However, she wasn't arrested that night due to her need for medical attention. Thus, Schultze was only treated for her bruises. Tanya Whitesell, who witnessed the accident, told police that the person driving the van looked like they were either trying to commit suicide or were high on drugs. She described how the van hesitated for a second before crossing the street and smashing into Angela's white car. Though the van flipped high into the air and landed on its roof after the impact, Schultze survived with only a broken jaw. Police discovered that while she'd been wearing a seatbelt, Angela, sadly, was not. On August 23, 1994, Gloria Schultze was indicted by a county grand jury on 1 count of manslaughter and 3 counts of endangerment. The first court appearance was slated for September 6th, but Schultze pleaded not guilty and was released without a requirement to post bond. However, the judge insisted that she come to drug testing 3 times a week and report to the court via phone call once in a week. Throughout that time, Schultze received 6 trial postponements and was permitted to leave the state 3 times for Christmas in California and for graduation, despite objections by the prosecutor.
No matter who you are, there are times it can be tough to be yourself when you have severe asthma.
In September 1995, 1 year after Angela's death, Arizona police offered Schultze a plea bargain arrangement. If she waived her right to a trial and pleaded guilty to the reckless endangerment and manslaughter charges, her sentence would be reduced to approximately 14 to 16 years. She agreed to the bargain, accepting the assurance of a lesser sentence. On September 15, 1995, a pretrial court hearing was scheduled for Schultze, but she was nowhere to be found. Further investigation showed that she'd missed 6 drug tests, and the last time she'd called the court was at the end of August. By then, she could have been calling from anywhere in the world. Police interviewed Schultze's family, who told the police that she'd cut ties with them after her disappearance, so none of them knew where she went. It didn't help matters that she was still in possession of her driving license after the crash. Gloria Schultze's mother, Carolyn, quickly filed a missing persons report for her daughter, saying that she believed Angela's mother had something to do with her daughter's disappearance. She also told police that she'd spoken to her daughter just a week before, and everything seemed fine. However, when she went to her house on September 13th, her daughter wasn't there, despite her belongings still being present. As the weeks passed, police made minimal efforts to search for Schultze, believing she'd forget not to stop at a stop sign or something, and her plates would be run. They also refused to search her home in Scottsdale, pointing to the need for permission from Schultze's parents, which wasn't granted. On October 30th, 1995, police told Rose Maher that before Schultze's disappearance, she'd maxed out 2 of her credit cards and sold 2 cars, which meant only one thing. She had planned her escape. Her parents also sold her home a month later, but even with all this information, Gloria Schultze remained missing. In 1996, the case was featured on a TV show called Unsolved Mysteries. Captain Folio and his team used that episode to recreate what happened at the crash scene that night. They, along with Angela's family, also used the opportunity to ask for information on Schultze, but nothing came out of it. Angela Maher's story was also featured on America's Most Wanted and other national TV shows, but nothing came of that either. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, as well as a private investigator were also called in, but they found no additional information. On May 3, 2001, the police decided to move forward and charge Schultze in absentia, which is when the trial is held without the accused being present. They called several unnamed witnesses to the stand who testified against Gloria Schultze. In the end, she was convicted on all 4 counts. Over the years, the case grew cold, as police had no new leads on Schultze's whereabouts. The 5'5" woman, weighing 115 pounds with red hair and green eyes, was posted on various TV channels, but this too produced no new information. In July 2002, years after Schultze's disappearance, Rose was more hurt than ever. She expressed her agony that the justice system had her daughter's killer and let her go with enough time to flee.
She's never spent a day in jail. She kept her driver's license. She went on every day like nothing happened.
In 2014, 2 decades after Angela Maher's death, the case was reopened and assigned to a new Scottsdale detective who continued working on it till his retirement in 2020. The case was reassigned to another detective, Cohen, who was hell-bent on solving it. That's when a breakthrough finally came. In 2024, a family member of Schultze called the detective in charge of the case with information about her. However, this wasn't something police would have expected. Based on the tip-off by Schultze's brother, police investigators reopened the case, and that led them to Canada, where they learned that Gloria Schultze had been living in Yellowknife, more than 2,600 miles away from Phoenix, Arizona. In 2009, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police had arrested her for driving under the influence of alcohol again. She'd been living under a different name, Kate Dooley. To everyone's surprise, they found out that she was known for her love of dogs, painting houses, working at mining camps in the Northwest Territories, and staging the community's fireworks shows. Schultze had built a perfect life for herself in another country, while Angela lay 6 feet under. Now that the police had found her, the case could continue on. Investigators ran Schultze's fingerprints through the criminal databases, as well as matching them from the ones taken from Kate Dooley in 2009. On April 17, 2024, they found them to be a match, confirming the evidence. However, Schultze had died on December 1, 2019 from cancer, way before the police knew what had happened to her. A newspaper article published the news of her death, along with a picture that matched the age-progressed photo of her. With no one to charge, the case was officially closed. Angela's brother, Don Maher, expressed relief that his sister's case had finally been resolved and they could move on. However, he was regretful that their mother, who passed away on September 28, 2021, and was buried next to her daughter, never got to see the end of the case and what eventually happened to Schultze. He also said that he was quite surprised to learn that Schultze had moved to Canada, as everyone's first thought was Mexico, considering its proximity to where the crime occurred. But it makes sense that you'd go somewhere that remote, that's completely off the grid, that people don't pay attention to, he said. Captain Folio expressed gratitude that the case had finally been resolved, regardless of the time it took. He also spoke about how his team did their best at the crash scene that night to make sure Angela didn't suffer before her death. For someone who started a Students Against Drunk Driving Club in Xavier College Preparatory High School after her friend died from driving under the influence, the tragedy that befell Angela Maher was ironic. Angela was always the designated driver who made sure everyone got home safely after a wild night out. Angela's life and legacy serves to remind us of the dangers and consequences of drunk driving. She'll always be remembered as someone who deeply cared about her family and friends and always wanted the best for them. A chilling double homicide took place in 1996, in which the authorities took 1 week to find the bodies of the victims, but nearly 3 decades to find the killer. This is the tale of 24-year-old Julianne Julie Williams and 26-year-old Laura Lolly Winans, the 2 unfortunate hikers who lost their lives in Shenandoah National Park. On May 19, 1996, Julie and Lolly had gone on a camping trip in Virginia's Shenandoah National Park with their beloved golden retriever, Taj. Their trip was meant to celebrate Julie's new job, and everything seemed perfect, until it wasn't. Their long-awaited trip did not end like others who left savoring the memories of pristine vistas and wildlife. Instead, they met with a mysterious fate that kept their story shrouded in darkness for nearly 3 decades. When they didn't return home as planned, Julie's family reached out to the National Park Service to file a missing complaint for both the girls. Rangers then searched the park until their car was found north of the Skyland Lodge. Another clue was found when the Rangers came across their golden retriever wandering the park alone. On June 1, 1996, after an extensive search of 1 week, Rangers found the savagely attacked bodies of Julie and Lolly. Lolly's body was discovered inside their tent, while Julie's body was found about 30 feet down an embankment. Their throats had been slashed, they were gagged and bound, and forensic testing revealed that both women had been sexually assaulted and murdered on May 24, 1996. The violent nature of the crime was quite evident, and it quickly became clear that this was one of the most merciless and shocking crimes ever to occur in a national park. The idyllic backdrop of the Blue Ridge Mountains now held a chilling silence. This case sent shockwaves through the community, not just for how violent it was, but because Lolly and Julie were openly lesbian at a time when LGBTQ+ people faced harsh prejudice. Therefore, it had been inherently expected that the suspect would be homophobic. So the investigation into this gruesome crime began immediately. Since the murders had occurred on federal land, the federal government, including the National Park Service and the FBI, took charge of the case. Despite their efforts and the thousands of leads discovered, no suspects came to light for over a year. In the later stages of the investigation, Julie's camera was found, which helped the police retrace their journey. The girls' trip had started on a peaceful note. They stopped at Pinnacle's Overlook on Skyline Drive, a scenic route that stretched for 105 miles through the park. After that, the couple set out on the White Oak Canyon Trail. They planned to hike for a few days, enjoying the serenity of the park. However, the weather turned rainy, so they decided to hitch a ride with a park ranger to renew their camping permits and seek shelter. Once the weather cleared, they continued their hike, eventually making their way to Hawksbill, the highest peak in Shenandoah. By the evening of May 24th, they set up camp near a stream just off the Bridle Trail. It was a spot about a quarter of a mile from Skyline Drive and half a mile from their parked vehicle at Skyland Lodge. Tragically, this would be their last peaceful night. Julie and Lolly would never be seen alive again. Julie's camera could not help the police find any evidence. However, male DNA was found on the gag in Julie's mouth, and there was hair stuck under the duct tape used. But the police had no suspect to match the DNA to for one whole year until 1997. In the summer of 1997, a critical lead came through. On July 9th, 1997, a Canadian tourist cycling the Skyline Drive was forcibly pushed off the road by a man driving a truck. He shouted profanities at her and attempted to abduct her. Miraculously, the woman managed to escape, but the man pursued her, trying to run her over multiple times before fleeing the scene. The attacker was quickly apprehended at Swift Run Gap as he was attempting to leave the park. The man was identified as Daryl David Rice, a resident of Columbia, Maryland. He had no prior criminal record, but was recently fired from his job for being extremely hostile. The discovery of handcuffs and leg restraints in Rice's vehicle also added a chilling dimension to the case. Further investigation revealed some similarities between the aggressive behavior of Rice and the violence of the Shenandoah murderer. Rice had now become a suspect in this case. And what happened next further solidified these suspicions. They found video clips of him entering Shenandoah National Park on May 25th and 26th, around the time Julie and Lolly were murdered. Rice denied being in the park on those days, but admitted to entering on June 1st, the same day the bodies were found. However, this was only circumstantial evidence. Several other people had also been present in the park during that time. Still, in April 2001, he was indicted for the murders of Julie and Lolly. Surprisingly, despite the significant development, the case did not proceed as hoped. Rice was never convicted for the Shenandoah murders. In 2003, a hair found at the crime scene was tested, and it did not match Rice's. Therefore, all the circumstantial evidence became invalid, and the charges against Rice were dismissed without prejudice. Rice, however, served his sentence for the attempted abduction and was released from prison in 2011. Although he was a suspect in another murder case, he was never charged in that matter as well. Since no new leads were found, the Shenandoah murder case became cold, as back then the technology was not as advanced as it is today. However, there were hopes that advances in DNA technology might one day provide the answers that Julie and Lolly's families desperately sought. Unfortunately, that day didn't come for the next 30 years.
Take control of your health by boosting your force field, the immune system. Aura tells you when your temperature is high.
In 2021, a fresh wave of hope swept over the investigation in this chilling case. A new team of investigators dove headfirst into the decades-old mystery. They pored over every detail, revisiting hundreds of leads and combing through countless interviews. Their mission was to unearth new clues and bring the shadowy figure behind these heinous crimes to light. The team meticulously reevaluated the evidence from the crime scene and submitted it to a top-notch private lab for retesting. And then the investigation took an unexpected turn in 2024. The lab managed to extract DNA from several crucial pieces of evidence. With bated breath, the team sent these profiles to the FBI's Combined DNA Index System, also known as CODIS. The result obtained was nothing short of dramatic, and a positive match to Walter Leo Jackson Sr., a serial rapist who had died 6 years ago, was found. Jackson, known to many as Leo, was a convicted criminal with a dark history that stretched back to Cleveland, Ohio. His past was marred by a string of violent crimes, including kidnapping, rape, and assault.
Sadly, as a result of the retests and further DNA comparisons, we are now able to say both Lolly and Julie were sexually assaulted. Jackson, who went by the name Leo, had a lengthy criminal history, including kidnapping, rape, and assaults.
Despite his heinous actions, Jackson had managed to stay under the radar for years, blending into the fabric of society while hiding his monstrous side. A residential painter by trade, Jackson was an avid hiker who frequented places like Shenandoah National Park, a detail that now loomed large in the case. As the investigation team dug deeper, they took no chances. They cross-referenced the DNA from the crime scene with a buccal swab from Jackson to ensure the match was ironclad. And indeed, the results confirmed what they'd hoped. They had identified the man responsible for the merciless murders of Lolly and Julie. Jackson's reign of terror had come to an end with his death in March 2018 in Cuyahoga County, Ohio. Though he'd been behind bars from 2011 to 2018, the final piece of justice was a long time coming.
This one has 2 rows.
And there you have it, the chilling, heart-wrenching tale of Lolly Winans and Julie Williams. What began as a tragic mystery in the serene backdrop of Shenandoah National Park unraveled to reveal a dark and haunting truth. It's still unclear if Jackson killed the couple because of his deep-seated hatred of the LGBTQ+ community, or if his violent tendencies played a more significant role. The complexity of his motivations leaves many questions unanswered, and while justice has been served, the true nature of his intentions remains shrouded in mystery. But at least this brings a sense of closure to both families who lost their loving daughters in the Shenandoah National Park.
That's hard. And it's beautiful, comforting. Doesn't seem this.
In July 1991, the Claus family received some gut-wrenching news that forever changed their lives. Around 10:30 a.m. on July 16, 1991, the body of 42-year-old Danielle Claus was discovered on the hillside located at the top of Tioga Drive near downtown Ventura, Texas. She was last seen on the evening of July 15th, just off the corner of Hemlock and Thompson Street Boulevard, talking to a man who was driving a white pickup truck with pinstripes. Due to the lack of evidence and resources at the time of the crime, the case went cold for more than 33 years before a breakthrough came in. On the morning of July 16, 1991, Danielle's husband called the police to report that his wife had gone missing, stating that she'd not made it home the previous night. Just a few hours after the phone call, Danielle's body was discovered. When investigators arrived at the crime scene, police found her body in what was described to be a gruesome state. Danielle was partially unclothed with multiple blunt force injuries, as stated by retired Lieutenant Douglas Aldridge, who initially worked on the case.
Around 10:30 a.m. on Tuesday, July 16, 1991, the body of Danielle Claus was found on the hillside located at the top of Tioga Drive near downtown Ventura. Danielle was found partially unclothed with multiple blunt force injuries and was last seen the evening of July 15, 1991 at the corner of Hemlock Street and Thompson Boulevard, talking to a male driving a small white pickup with pinstripes.
When an autopsy was carried out, what the police discovered was even more shocking. Danielle had been assaulted and had multiple blunt force injuries to the head. Due to the severity of the wound, she had succumbed and died from these injuries. At the time, investigators collected fingerprints, cigarette butts, trash, papers, and everything else that appeared to be potential evidence. They also happened to have collected a blood-stained rock, which they believed to be the murder weapon, and fingernail clippings from Danielle. Investigators also canvassed the area looking for traces of a white pickup truck, which they believed belonged to the suspect in Danielle's murder case. To advance the investigation, detectives delved into Danielle's life, hoping to uncover clues. Born on July 24, 1948, to Mrs. Claus, Danielle was an artist, a wife, mother, and sister. Much of Danielle's life remains a mystery, but what we do know is that she had a big family who loved and cherished her. And that family was now faced with not only the pain of her loss, but also the burden of decades of uncertainty. Without much evidence to work on, no leads, and a lack of forensic technology at the time, the case led nowhere, and with time, it went cold.
Hi there, this is Gillis. I'm here in Chicago, and I'm here to find out what people know about autism. Let's go.
You know, I missed my sister. I just didn't have a lot of trust that they were doing everything they could because so many years had gone by.
However, in 2021, things began to ramp up again when Ventura Police Detective Tyler Buck reopened the case decades later with the help of preserved evidence left over from the scene.
A few years back, when I was a newer major crimes detective, I developed a pretty significant interest in cold cases, and I was hoping that I'd be able to find something that one of the investigators missed somewhere along the way, something that I could help move the case forward.
A DNA profile had reportedly been submitted for the suspect, but investigators never found a match. Initially, DNA samples from the case were entered into the Combined DNA Index System, a national database of DNA profiles from convicted offenders, unsolved crime scene evidence, and missing people. However, there were never any hits. Buck went ahead and reached out to the crime scene investigation team, and they were able to look through the evidence gathered again. This was when they learned that the initially assumed murder weapon, a bloodied rock, and the victim's fingernail clippings had never been tested.
In May of 2021, our CSI team met with Major Crimes and Ventura County Crime Lab forensic scientist Kristen Kenko to present the untested evidence and request for a test so that the DNA on the rock and the fingernail clippings to be compared to the DNA from the sexual assault kit. This test would either confirm or deny that our murder suspect and the suspect were one of the same. So by September 2021, all the DNA came back as a match to one unknown suspect.
With the results that came in September 2021, police discovered that there was a singular unknown person responsible for both the assault and the slaying of Danielle. After the collection of DNA evidence, the investigative team utilized modern methods such as familial genealogy to help solve the case. They also reached out to multiple agencies simultaneously, all in a bid to link every connecting dot. Once a genetic profile was built, senior forensic genealogist Misty Gills uploaded it all to the genealogy databases, including Ancestry DNA, 23andMe, MyHeritage DNA, Family Tree DNA, and many more. By 2022, genealogists were able to build out part of the suspect's family tree, and with further investigations, found a living family member. A lady, cousin to the later proposed prime suspect, Larry Devon Welsh. In revisiting her family tree, police learned that she only had 2 male first cousins, which narrowed their search even further. Now investigators were focused on those 2 cousins, the Welsh brothers, but they soon learned that only one brother was alive. They found that Larry Devon Welsh, the suspect in the 1991 murder case of Danielle Claus, had passed away on August 13, 1999, at the age of 50. In October 2023, a cold case sexual assault unit in Ventura further developed a profile on both Welsh brothers to help figure out which one of the brothers may have committed the crime. After extensive research, police were able to link evidence to Larry Devon Welsh. The deceased Welsh brother had brown hair and hazel eyes, while the living brother had blonde hair and blue eyes. The analysis revealed with a high degree of confidence that the suspect had brown or green eyes and brown hair, consistent with the appearance of Larry Devon Welsh. Still, investigators needed DNA from his living brother to confirm whether Larry was the suspect. The Virginia State Police assisted investigators in connecting with Welsh's brother, who proved very helpful in the investigation. Welsh's brother confirmed for investigators that Welsh owned a white Ford Ranger. He also had a P.O. box in Ventura the year Danielle died. Witness reports also claimed to have seen Welsh in the area where Danielle's body was found. With all of these, detectives were able to tie Welsh to the crime scene. Welsh's brother also provided police with a sample of his DNA in 2024. When the Virginia State Police tested his DNA, it did not prove a match, so they ruled him out as a suspect in the victim's case. This result confirmed that the suspect's DNA found at the crime scene belonged to Larry Devon Welsh, who was now deceased. During investigations, police discovered that there was no known connection between Larry Devon Welsh and Danielle at the time of the crime. Danielle had probably never even met Welsh until the night of July 15th. So the motive behind the atrocious crime remained a mystery to everyone. Danielle's sister recalls how hard it was for her to see her sister in that state. She says she's grateful that she's alive and she can see her sister get justice. She also talks about what Danielle was like in person.
Time progressed, they had found her and identified her. I remember going to see her in the mortuary. I remember she was so badly beaten that she was unrecognizable. And I didn't want my mother to see her like that. It was just devastating, holidays, and I always prayed that not so much there'd be justice, but that I'd be able to know who did this. 31 years later, my prayers were answered. They did a phenomenal job, and I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful that I lived to see at least a meter of justice, and that they found out who did this, even though he died 8 years after she was killed. I want to say that my sister was so much more than a victim of a brutal murder. She was more than an artist and a daughter, a sister, a mother, a wife. She was more than all of those things. She was a good person with a mighty soul. And she was taken way, way too young.
While the reason for this senseless murder might forever be unknown to her loved ones and the police officers who searched and hoped for answers for 33 years, her family can now finally rest easy and find solace, knowing that they finally got answers on what truly happened to Danielle.
70% of women are affected by uterine fibroids, and they are often overlooked. At the Center for Fibroid Care.
Hate commercials.
On February 23, 2002, the perfect life of a community leader, enthusiast, and cook, Lottie Tenon Flowers, ended up being taken abruptly in her home in Rockford, Illinois. Thus began a 22-year-long search for the killer. On the February morning, when the 71-year-old Lottie was killed, she had been reportedly baking pies for an event at Pilgrim Baptist Church in her kitchen, and no one else was home at that time. David Flowers, Lottie's husband, returned home around 12:40 p.m. that day and met his wife hanging on for her life. However, Lottie succumbed to her wounds shortly after being rushed to Rockford Memorial Hospital. She was stabbed 24 times. Lottie Flowers' death was one of the most confusing deaths ever because the motive behind killing a woman who had spent more than 48 years of her life serving the community of Rockford, Illinois, was difficult to comprehend. As mentioned before, Lottie was home alone baking pies at the time, and according to what was discovered at the crime scene, the killer had broken into her home and proceeded to stab her. There was no explanation for this. The technology available at that time wasn't advanced enough to trace the DNA found lodged beneath Lottie's fingernails and ring. Lottie's grandson, Ben E. Tenen, described his grandmother as a kind and caring person who put everyone's needs before her own. Family, friends, and people in the community could not wrap their heads around this, as they couldn't comprehend the possible reason for Lottie Flowers to end up that way. Lottie Tenen Flowers was born on May 12, 1931, in Columbus, Lowndes County, Mississippi, to James and Maddie Kidd. She graduated from Lambert High School and after 2 years got married to Luther Tenen on December 26, 1951. Lottie, who previously lived in Vance, Mississippi, moved to Rockford, Illinois with her husband Luther. The couple had 5 children together. However, after 38 years of marriage, Lottie and Luther got divorced, and on April 6, 1991, Lottie married David Flowers of Rockford. Lottie Tenen Flowers had lived for 49 years in Rockford before she was murdered. During those years, she had graciously served the community by working at the Rockford Memorial Hospital, Warner Lambert Company, and Rockford Board of Education. Lottie was also a very active Christian. She was a fervent member and stewardess at Great Nooster Hope Baptist Church, St. Luke Missionary Baptist Church, and the Pilgrim Baptist Church. Church aside, Lottie also served as the president of the West Side Neighborhood Association. Now, this might seem like a whole lot for just one person, but Lottie Flowers handled it all with grace and poise. Although Lottie Flowers had lived a gracious life of devoted servitude to the community, the woman was paid back with pure evil. The investigation into Lottie's case showed that she'd been stabbed in her face, neck, and torso 24 times. An intruder had broken into the house, but no one had any idea who he was. The DNA analysis and the autopsy were not of much help either. Apart from the gruesome crime scene where Lottie was stabbed, there was no other evidence at the time in 2002. But the case wasn't about to be dropped. Not when the whole community of Rockford was hell-bent on getting to the root of the matter, even if it took several years, which it eventually did. After the gruesome crime in 2002, there were several suspects that the family and friends of the late Lottie had in mind. However, with no solid evidence, there was nothing that could be done. However, investigators' determination to uncover the crime kept the case going for several years. Winnebago County Assistant State's Attorney Ken LaRue and Sheriff Gary Caruana had talked about how the detectives involved had worked tirelessly to uncover the cold case. A lot of great people, a lot of tenacious peeps, and are not giving up on anything. You know that they're looking at everything warm, as you'd say, or cold, and they continue to drill down. Obviously, the technology of DNA and different tools help, but they keep drilling down and doing a great job, said Sheriff Gary Caruana. But then again, there comes a point in life where people eventually get weary of trying, especially where the goal seems to be out of reach. And so, more than a decade later, after 2012 with no progress, the case went cold. There were no further investigations made during these years, and by the 2020s, family and friends had somewhat given up and moved on. Finding the killer seemed to be a miracle at that point. However, miracles indeed do occur, because in March 2024, 22 years after the crime occurred, with the advancement of technology, new strategies, and the zeal to pick up the case again, the killer was finally identified. Authorities were able to link the DNA found on the victim to an inmate who had already been in jail since 2012 for double homicide.
What the sheriff had said that Marion Jones is currently in the Department of Corrections. He's in the Joliet Treatment Center. He's doing life plus 60 years. He was also charged and found guilty of attempt murder and home invasion related to the double homicide.
The suspect, 39-year-old Omarion Jones, was believed to have been just 17 years old when he committed the crime in 2002.
This Halloween, come trick-or-treat down Sesame Street during the Count's Halloween Spooktacular.
Upon hearing that the killer had been found, Ben E. Tenen on March 21st, 2024 said,
That would just show up or they would just find it miraculously. I was hoping that for the whole 22 years.
Jones was charged with first-degree murder. MacArthur Tennant also mentioned recalling that over the last decade before the killer was found, they had heard Omarion Jones's name from one of the detectives during conversations. However, as there is no solid proof then, there was nothing that could be done. The intent of the murder hasn't been revealed. That's if there was even any in the first place. But with the recorded deaths of 3 older people at his hands, the killings appeared to be more of a pattern. Forgiveness. According to the family, this is one of the words the late Lottie Tennant Flowers emphasized till her death. Her family had talked about how Lottie would have wanted them to forgive whomever took her life. She was also a Christian woman. She'd want us to forgive. That's exactly what she'd want us to do, Leona, MacArthur Tennant's wife, said. Also, even after finding out about the killer, it was rumored that the family had prayed for him because it's what Lottie would have wanted. It seemed that 20 years after the murder occurred, all the family needed was just to know who the killer was so their hearts could finally be at peace. Imprisoned or not, that wasn't what they pursued. At least, not any longer. Yet, just as the fieldwork appeared destined to be as uneventful as usual, the officers were abruptly shaken from their monotonous routine by a shocking and unexpected discovery. This shocking discovery raised the question of whether he'd been prowling around Nashville during that time, or if he had simply abandoned the car and vanished elsewhere. However, little did Shirley know that helping her son financially all the time was only going to backfire in the most devastating way imaginable. But little did she know that it would mark the final day of her life, sealing her fate in the most tragic way imaginable. But the scene that unfolded moments later was beyond his worst fears. He was confronted with the most gruesome sight of his life, the lifeless, bloody body of Shirley Merritt. On top of it, he also had to justify why he chose to run away right after the murder, evade his prison sentence, and begin a new life with a new identity in Nashville. On the silent night of July 25th, 1965, a 17-year-old girl was dropped off at her home by friends after attending a function. As soon as the girl reached the front porch of her house, she realized she'd forgotten her house keys in her friend's car. The girl then ran behind the vehicle to get the attention of her friends, but she never came back home. This girl was Tanya Weber. A chilling discovery shook the people of Logan the next morning when Tanya was found dead not far from her home. Within days, a suspect was identified, but the chilling murder of Tanya was about to turn into a mystery. This case recorded itself as Utah's oldest open cold case in history, which took 59 years to see the light of justice. On Friday, June 25th, 1965, Tanya and her friends attended the wedding at a chapel around 6 miles south of Logan. Tanya ended up catching the bride's bouquet during the reception. As the celebrations ended, the girls drove to a pizza place to eat before heading home. Midnight had fallen, and it was around 11:40 p.m. when they reached Tanya's house at 454 West Center Street to drop her off. Bidding goodbye to her friends, Tanya headed towards the main door. Sadly, that would be the last time she'd be seen alive. As she reached the porch area of her house, she realized she'd forgotten her keys in the car and ran in the vehicle's direction for a block to catch up with her friends. This little incident was about to change everything, because what happened to her after that became a mystery forever. Tanya did not return, nor did she succeed in catching up with her friends. The next day, roughly a block away from the Weber's house, a neighbor found Tanya's body shoved behind the bushes at the rear of her residence on 324 West Center Street. Tanya was lying face down, partially clothed, with only a pink zipper sweater on her body. Her neck was tied up by one of her stockings, and her lower limbs had been covered with mud, like she was dragged along for a distance. Logan City Police and Cache County Sheriff's detectives collected Tanya's deceased body, ruled her death as a homicide, and sent the body for autopsy. Logan was called one of the safest cities to live in, and the murder of Tanya Weber was one of the very first homicidal incidents in Logan in the last 35 years. The news spread like lightning through the city and terrified the locals to the level that they began fearing getting out of their homes at night. Detectives began their investigation by looking into her life. Born on November 10, 1947, Tanya was the firstborn child of Sterling and Marion Weber. During the 1960s, in the city of Logan, the couple was raising a large, happy family with 3 girls and 3 boys. Tanya, the eldest of all her siblings, was in high school in 1965 and was soon to become a senior. The month was June 1965, and the Weber family had to attend a family gathering in Weiser, Idaho. On the other hand, one more function awaited their presence back in Logan around the same time. It was the wedding of a friend of Tanya's. Eventually, Tanya stayed back at home to attend her friend's wedding, and the rest of the family went to Weiser. Little did anybody know, it was a decision that would come back to haunt them. Progressing their investigations, they conducted several interviews. The guests who attended the wedding reception were interviewed at first, but nothing provided any substantial clues. While conducting the interviews in the neighborhood of and around the murder scene, the detectives met an eyewitness. It was a boy in Tanya's neighborhood who was watching late-night TV when Tanya had come home. He stated that he saw her running in the car's direction from his window. Meanwhile, Tanya's autopsy report came back. Pathologists confirmed that she was strangled to death, but her stocking had not been used to strangle her. It was done by hand, which left bruises on her neck. The stocking appeared as an afterthought of the killer. It was also confirmed that the autopsy thought, although Tanya was found partially clothed, there was no evidence of physical assault on the body. In the investigation process, as many as 1,000 interviews were conducted throughout the neighborhood, and out of those 1,000, around 150 statements pointed out the name of a peeping Tom in the area. A 27-year-old man, Owen Kimball, was named as a suspect who had lived not far from Tanya's house. Detectives extracted a name in confidence after days of investigation, but unfortunately, as they approached to interrogate Kimball in his home, they found out that he'd been missing since the murder of Tanya. Kimball's wife told the detectives that he'd gone up to Logan Canyon to collect bait for an upcoming fishing trip with his 2 young sons and was yet to return. When they went through Kimball's belongings, detectives discovered some eerie evidence. They found Tanya's photographs and some notes with her name circled, giving probable signs of infatuation. Kimball just lived down the street in that neighborhood, and there was no doubt that he wouldn't have known who Tanya was and where she lived. This linked Kimball with Tanya and her murder on a personal level, and therefore a search started throughout the city to locate him. After 4 days of intense searching, Kimball's pickup truck was finally located in a heavy bush by a civilian pilot flying over Mount Logan. What happened later was highly unforeseen, as detectives found Kimball dead inside his truck, with material stuffed in the vehicle's tailpipe, apparently used for the purposes of asphyxiation. He died due to carbon monoxide poisoning, and his death was ruled as him taking his own life. As fate would have it, Tanya's murder had occurred only a month after new Utah law had eliminated the use of juries in homicides involving a deceased suspect who could not be put on trial. As Kimball had passed away, the chances of solving Tanya's murder had also reduced, as no other suspicion entertained the detectives. However, neighbors still believed Kimball murdered Tanya, but Kimball's family denied all such claims. As nothing beyond circumstantial evidence was available after the investigation, the murder case of Tanya Weber went cold and remained unsolved. Years passed by, and although several police chiefs had investigators reopen the case multiple times over the years in hopes of bringing closure to the family, they didn't succeed. The mystery of the murder of Tanya Weber had faded away from the memories of most, but not her 4 siblings, including her younger sister, Rhonda Weber. Rhonda's memories of her older sister were still fresh, and she condemned the lack of closure. Around 2015, on Tanya's 50th death anniversary, Rhonda visited some esteemed newspaper agencies with a bundle of old news articles, asking them to revisit the story. In an interesting turn of events, around the same time in 2015, the Bureau of Justice Assistance formed a new program called the Assault Kit Initiative Grant, also known as the SAKI Grant. The purpose of this grant program was to raise funds for the evidence testing of assault cases that had never been transferred to a crime laboratory. The advancement in DNA technologies led to the formation of this grant. Luckily, among many other such cases, Tanya's case also saw light after 57 years. Funding was generated for the murder case through the Saki grant in 2022, and finally, the Logan City Police Department reopened the case. Tanya's clothing and other pieces of evidence were sent to Utah State Crime Lab, where the truth was fated to be uncovered. With the use of DNA technology, some male DNA was found in Tanya's clothes, along with a mixture of DNA. The late Owen Kimball, a name from the past, was already in the queue for investigators. With this new lead, they were able to obtain a judge's order to exhume Kimball's body on November 2nd, 2023. The exhumed body of Kimball was then used to collect DNA samples from his bones and muscle tissue. This time, despite all the years, the DNA did not fail to astonish the scientists. The samples were an exact match. The Utah State Crime Lab and an independent lab in Virginia confirmed the DNA found on Tanya's clothing to be Kimball's. This was the final physical evidence needed, apart from the circumstantial evidence present back in 1965, to obtain a verdict beyond a reasonable doubt. After more than half a century, exactly 59 years after the fateful night, Tanya Weber's murder was solved on June 26, 2024. The case now stands as the oldest cold case in Utah to be solved in 2024.
It was just really terrible. I didn't know quite how to handle it. There was just horrible screams. I can't tell you how much peace of mind I have.
So you think about it now and again, because that was a very prominent case in my career. I had about 27 active years in law enforcement. And that was the one that I really worked probably the hardest on. We've gotten the call this morning from Lieutenant Randall was made my day.
As Kimball was already deceased, the exact events of June 25th, 1965 remain a mystery forever. But this revelation was enough for the remaining Weber family to close this unfinished chapter and put their minds at ease.
Tired of spending your days and nights managing all your paperwork processes with multiple tools? Good news. Anvil Document AI helps you build software.
Police in Riviera Beach tonight say they have tracked down the two men responsible for a double murder from 2014.
On the evening of March 4th, 2014, a horrific crime unfolded in Riviera Beach, Florida, when two men were gunned down in cold blood in front of a tire and auto repair shop. The victims, 54-year-old Murat Oziros and 18-year-old Deandra McCoy, were rushed to a nearby hospital, but tragically, neither survived. To their loved ones, the crime made no sense, but they had hope that they'd find justice, never imagining the case would go cold. Sadly, that's exactly what had happened. It ultimately took a full decade for authorities to close the case, and when it was finally solved in 2024, it came with even more shocking revelations. It was the late evening of March 4th, 2014, a day that would forever alter the lives of two families in Riviera Beach. The local shops were winding down for the night, with nothing out of the ordinary expected, much less something so terrifying. Around 8 p.m., Murat Oziros stood in front of his shop, Florida Sunshine Tires and Auto Center, on the 1500 block of Avenue E. Nearby, Deandra McCoy, a family friend of the Oziros family and an employee, was helping Murat move tires back into the shop as they prepared to close for the day. Suddenly, a man armed with a gun approached the store and opened fire on both Murat and Deandra, leaving them bleeding on the street. The assailant fired more shots, but miraculously, no one else was hurt. One of Murat's sons was also at the shop that evening, but thankfully, he'd managed to escape unharmed. When emergency services had arrived at the scene, both men were barely clinging to life. Riviera Beach Fire Rescue rushed them to St. Mary's Medical Center in West Palm Beach, but tragically, they couldn't be revived. Meanwhile, the Riviera Beach police began their investigation of the crime scene, but the evidence was sparse, with just a few shell casings found around the scene. Witnesses reported seeing the shooter get into a gray or blue Chrysler 300, which was driven by another man. The getaway vehicle had sped south on Avenue E, with witnesses noting it had a temporary donut spare tire on the front. It was also discovered that no money was taken, but a gold necklace belonging to Murat was stolen, along with some other personal belongings. Despite neither Murat nor Deandra resisting the robbers, they were still senselessly gunned down. To determine if either victim had any enemies or someone who might have wanted to harm them, detectives began interviewing their families. The murders made no sense to the Oziros family, but the impact was nonetheless devastating.
How many times did I make them know? Why they wanna disrupt, kill my flow? How many times did I switch time zone, but the LD will always be home? But I will never lose swings, lose swings, lose swings.
Hoboken in New... Murat's wife of 29 years, Cynthia Oziros, shared with the media that her husband had come to the United States from Haiti in the late 1970s in pursuit of the American dream. By all accounts, Murat had achieved that dream. He got married, raised 5 children, and opened 2 successful businesses in Palm Beach County. In addition to the tire and auto center, Murat also owned a landscaping business in Boca Raton, Florida. Cynthia emphasized that Murat was driven by a deep desire to provide for his family. He loved his children and ensured they had everything they needed, a commitment that extended to his grandchildren as well. Cynthia also shared that Murat worked tirelessly, rarely taking any time off, even after suffering a stroke in November 2013. Despite his health challenges, his spirit never wavered. He refused to accept handouts from anyone, though he was always eager to lend a helping hand to others.
Loved his family, loved his kids, his grandkids. People in the neighborhood used to call him stepdad because he was just a dad to everybody.
Everyone turned to him for help. He'd even fix people's tires for free if they couldn't afford it. Murat was well known and respected in the community. Everyone saw him as a good person. He didn't just want the best for his family. He wanted the best for the entire neighborhood.
He was just a good person in his heart. He was a good person, you know. I mean, I couldn't ask for anything better.
In their 15 years of living in the neighborhood, the Oziros family had never encountered any trouble. It was difficult for them to accept that anyone could have the heart to commit such a horrific crime against them. Deandra McCoy, on the other hand, was a hardworking teenager who took the job at the tire shop to make ends meet. He just graduated high school and dreamed of going to college in Orlando. Deandra's mother, Marissa Correa, shared that they were looking into student housing just days before his murder. Like his boss, Deandra was also known for his kindness and willingness to help those in need.
He's a lovable person. He's smart. He was someone that really didn't get a chance to do what he had planned to do in life.
And such a good young man, so respectable, always trying to help out an elderly person.
He didn't have any beef with anyone. He was a young man whose chance at life was stolen far too soon. With no clear leads, detectives began asking around the neighborhood. As they spoke to different people, they uncovered a shocking truth. The shooting at the tire shop wasn't a random act of violence. The perpetrators were on a crime spree, having committed at least 2 other armed robberies around the same time in the area. They'd pull up in stolen vehicles, jump out, and demand property. Despite compliance, victims were still shot. What initially appeared to be a random robbery spree had ended in a senseless tragedy, rather than a premeditated murder. However, progress in the investigation stalled. Despite detailed descriptions of the robbers and their stolen vehicle, authorities were unable to track them down. With a homicide raid in Riviera Beach High, the Riviera Beach police were forced to shift their focus to other pressing cases. As days turned into months and months into years, with no new leads, the case went cold. The families of Murat and Deandra struggled to maintain hope. Cynthia later shared how she would drive around town, seeing countless pictures of people at bus stops and cold cases, which only deepened her despair. Moving on seemed nearly impossible. After Murat's death, the family shut down Florida Sunshine Tires to cope with their immense loss. Meanwhile, Deandra's family relocated to escape their grief and begin healing. Throughout this time, the perpetrators remained at large, evading justice for an entire decade. After nearly a decade of stagnation, the department's cold case unit, comprising 3 detectives, all former federal agents, reopened the investigation in November 2022. With fresh eyes, they reviewed old evidence and conducted new interviews, hoping to uncover a solid lead. Their persistence paid off with a surprising breakthrough. During an arrest in 2024 related to an armed robbery in West Palm Beach, police seized a vehicle containing 2 guns. When these guns were test-fired and entered into a law enforcement database, they matched the shell casings found at the tire shop shooting scene. Further DNA testing on the weapons linked the firearms to 2 men, 33-year-old Lavon Heath and 34-year-old Jeffrey Brown. For the first time in a decade, the identities of the individuals responsible for the murders of Murat Oziros and Deandra McCoy were revealed. Both men were indicted on March 26, 2024, for their roles in the deadly 2014 shooting.
If your dog has food sensitivities, their food might have ingredients that don't agree with you or your dog.
Cynthia had nearly lost all hope of seeing her husband's killers brought to justice. So, in April 2024, when detectives informed her of the indictments against 2 men, she could hardly believe it. As she called her children to share the news that their father's killers had finally been caught, she felt an immense weight lift from her chest. In a twist of fate, Lavon Heath was apprehended on his 33rd birthday following another violent incident. On February 12, 2024, at around 4:49 p.m., Riviera Beach police responded to a distress call at a Chevron gas station on West Blue Heron Boulevard and Barack Obama Highway. Initially reported as a fight, the situation escalated when 43-year-old Calbert Dawson was shot and killed inside his vehicle by Lavon Heath. Heath was later arrested by the U.S. Marshals Fugitive Task Force on March 7, 2024. Meanwhile, Jeffrey Brown was already incarcerated at Martin County Correctional Institution in Indiantown on charges of drug trafficking and firearm possession. For their involvement in the murders of Murat Oziros and Deandra McCoy, both Lavon Heath and Jeffrey Brown face 1 count of first-degree murder with a firearm and 1 count of felon in possession of a firearm. On April 5, 2024, the Riviera Beach Police Department held a press conference to announce the resolution of the case.
Well, good morning, and thank you all for being here. Certainly, this is a somber moment for the family because they relived these emotions that they went through a long time ago, but I'm glad that we are working diligently to provide closure.
Murat's family attended the press conference, with Cynthia flanked by her 2 sons. She expressed deep gratitude toward the detectives and spoke about how much this closure meant to them.
For helping us close this case, we have justice for our family, and now we can move on, and it was long and it was hard, but I just want to say thank you very much to everyone that was involved.
Deandra's family, who couldn't attend the press conference, shared their own heartfelt emotions. While the arrest marked the end of a painful and agonizing wait, true closure still felt out of reach, a reminder that some wounds never fully heal.
There's really never closure because the one question that I have, they're not going to be able to answer that. And my question, what was going on and why it had to happen.
As this case drew to a close, many other families continued to wait for answers. Major Josh Lewis, who leads the Riviera Beach Police Department's investigative unit, vowed that the cold case team's work would pave the way for more arrests and justice.
I want to send a message, and the message is that if you commit a crime in this city, I don't care if it's in 1970, I don't care if it's in 1980, 1990, we will find you, we will hunt you down, we will do what we need to do to make sure that you're brought to justice. And today is an example of that.
On November 22, 1984, Wendy Jerome left her house to deliver a birthday card to a friend. What would have been a normal Thanksgiving for the family turned into a night of sadness and despair, as Wendy could never make it back home. Hours went by before her body was found in the courtyard of a school. The police later revealed that Wendy had been assaulted and beaten to death. Due to the lack of witnesses, clues, and sufficient DNA technology at the time, the case went cold for nearly 40 years. The Wendy family continued to suffer with disappointment and grief in their pursuit of justice for decades. Their resilience paid off when a suspect was finally brought to justice. The horrific incident took place at around 7 p.m. on November 22, 1984. It was Thanksgiving, and Wendy had just finished dinner with her father. Both of them sat in the comfort of their home and waited for Marlene Jerome, Wendy's mother, to come home from work so the family could have dessert together. November 23rd was also the birthday of Wendy's friend. However, since it was Thanksgiving, Wendy knew that she wouldn't be able to see her friend that day. That being said, she decided to give the birthday card to her friend early. Wendy lived on Denver Street and had permission to go to her friend's house on Alexis Street, Rochester, New York, located just 3 blocks away. Although Wendy had permission, her parents had asked her to be home by 8 p.m. Her mother, who had arrived home, decided to take a nap. She woke up from her nap at 8:15 p.m. and rushed to Wendy's room, and this is where the panic began. The clock was already past 8, and Wendy was not back home yet. When her parents were unable to reach her, they realized something was wrong. They'd immediately called the police, and then the search for 14-year-old Wendy officially began. Soon after the investigation began, the family's worst fear unfortunately manifested into reality. Around 3 hours had gone by since the search was initiated when a passerby found Wendy's body in the courtyard of school number 33 on Webster Avenue. She'd been assaulted and beaten to death. An autopsy that was conducted at the time revealed that she'd lost the battle for life due to blunt force trauma. Her skull appeared to have been fractured due to what medical examiners described as a blow with significant force. Apart from that, multiple signs of lacerations suggested that Wendy had put up a fight against her attacker, a fight during which she was assaulted and would lose the battle for life. DNA samples were also collected from the scene of Wendy's murder. However, back in 1984, forensic science was still in its infancy. Given the lack of technological advancements in DNA testing, these samples were worth close to nothing. They couldn't be analyzed and compared through databases, which would help create a list of suspects and ultimately identify the killer. Apart from these samples, there were no other clues at the murder scene and no witnesses. Despite this, the police continued with their efforts to find the killer. However, with no clues or leads, there was very little that could have been done. The case then reached a dead end, which meant that the Wendy family would be left in agonizing pain for decades to come. The victim's mother had suffered to such an extent that she required medication and therapy to cope with the loss of her daughter and the reality in which justice had not yet prevailed. As time progressed, Wendy Jerome, who was once the cause of happiness and the purpose of life for her parents, would continue to become a distant yet not forgotten memory. A memory that was filled with sadness and despair over the loss of a loved one and with disappointment towards the lack of justice. The case of her murder had officially gone cold.
I'm 32 years old and my skin is better now than in my 20s because I started investing in high quality skincare. My nightly go-to, the Clarins iconic double serum, has...
As time progressed, DNA technology experienced major advancements. Equipped with new hope, investigators attempted to test the samples that were collected from the crime scene all those years ago. In 2000, official tests were run through the Combined Index DNA System, or CODIS. However, these tests failed to yield any results, given the CODIS was still in its infancy and had a limited pool of DNA samples to cross-check. The next attempt was in 2016, and by that time, it had reached a point where more items of potential evidence could be analyzed to narrow down the suspects. The database had also been updated by this time and had more accurate data. However, the ultimate breakthrough in Wendy's murder investigation did not prevail until 2019. During that year, it was finally considered that there was substantial evidence for familial DNA testing. These tests allowed investigators to get new leads in a case that was growing perpetually cold. The samples were run through the state database for any familial match. Investigators were able to narrow down the list of suspects to one individual, and an arrest was made in September 2020. To confirm the identity of the suspect, tests were done on Wendy's clothes, the assault kit taken during autopsy, and items taken from the crime scene. Results revealed that the likely suspect was Timothy Williams. Williams was only 20 years of age when Wendy was assaulted and murdered. Both individuals lived in the same neighborhood. However, they didn't know each other. Williams was identified as a possible suspect from a genetic family tree. It's worth mentioning that after the murder, Williams had moved to Florida. The police collected DNA samples from his Florida residence, and sure enough, they matched those from the crime scene. The Monroe County District Attorney's Office announced the arrest of Timothy Williams, now 56, from his Florida residence on September 11, 2020.
For the last 35 years, major crimes investigators traveled to Melbourne, Florida earlier this week. On Wednesday, September 9th, with the assistance of the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, we arrested Timothy Lee Williams at his home and charged him with the murder of Wendy.
He was the first person in the state to go on trial with an arrest backed by familial DNA. While on trial, Williams denied the accusations leveled against him and stated that he had consensual intimacy with Wendy 36 years ago and that he did not hurt her. He went on to state that he feared being charged for being physically intimate had he told the police about that night. Williams pleaded not guilty, and the case progressed further, but there were a few road bumps along the way. In December 2023, a verdict due to a mistrial was declared due to jury misconduct. The Wendy family, who were in pursuit of justice, were left waiting a while longer. The victim's father unfortunately passed away before the trial ended, not knowing who had ended the life of his teenage daughter. Sharing his thoughts on the matter, Bill Jerome, the victim's younger brother, said, "My father passed away from cancer before ever knowing who murdered his little girl. And for my dad to take that to his grave, it wears me out every day." After waiting for a few more months, justice for Wendy's family finally prevailed on March 8, 2024, when the court proceedings ended. The jury took 5 hours to give their verdict on a case that had carried on for 40 years. As per their verdict, Timothy Williams was found guilty on all charges leveled against him. After the verdict was announced, Marlene Jerome, the victim's mother, said,
"This door is closed. After all these years, this door is closed. Will it ever be over for me? No. But this door is closed. And now we gear up for the next part of this."
When asked to comment on the relationship she had with her daughter and the type of person she was, Marlene Jerome went on to say,
"Always will be. My heart. I heard. That's who he was. He was a friend. She was a daughter, a sister. He wasn't a person that know her and love her."
On April 17, 2024, the culprit, Timothy Williams, age 60, was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. A jury found him guilty the month before on 3 counts of second-degree murder. With the sentencing, the case that had gone cold for 4 decades was finally closed, as justice for the victim and her family was served. The case of Wendy Jerome is yet another example of how justice prevailed due to technological advancements. Wendy Jerome's story reminds us that, no matter how long it takes, the pursuit of justice never truly ends.
Ya camino.
5-minute warning for Tyler.
Sounds good. Over.
At Grand Canyon University, we believe in equal opportunity, and the American dream starts with purpose.
On June 12, 1963, 24-year-old Wayne Pratt was found dead at the Enco service station in Winnebago County, Wisconsin. Police immediately ruled his death as a homicide when they discovered the cause. Though there were several clues pointing to who the killer could be, the police were unable to make a significant discovery until 2011. Even so, a suspect was named 7 years later in 2018, and it took police another 6 years to finally have enough evidence to formally make an arrest charge. In July 2024, more than 6 decades after Wayne Pratt's death, someone was finally charged with his murder. But by then, things had drastically changed. On June 12, 1963, Wayne Pratt had been at home watching TV when a white car pulled up to the service station around 8:40 p.m. Since he and his wife, Mary Pratt, lived about 50 feet away from the gas station, Wayne quickly went to attend to the customer who was parked between the pumps and the station while his wife continued working. Some minutes later, a second car had arrived and parked on the other side of the pumps. The first car, most likely a Chevrolet or Pontiac, had driven off, leaving the second car, a two-tone blue older model Buick. Since Wayne was an operator at the station, Marie wasn't too bothered about his absence until he still hadn't come home nearly 10 minutes later. When she looked out and saw the lights at Enco hadn't been turned on, she became worried and decided to go and search for him herself. Turning on the light, the first thing she found were traces of blood leading to the station's back room. Fearing the worst, she rushed in, only to find a blanket covering something. It had been soaked in blood, and an acidic smell was already emanating from it. Scared, she opened it up, only to see the body of her late husband. Upon encountering the scene, Marie had burst into tears and shouted for passers-by to help her, with one of them having called the Winnebago County Police at 9 p.m. By the time the police came, Wayne had already been dead. Upon seeing the body, Wisconsin police had ruled the station as a crime scene and ordered everyone else to leave. On first assessment, they determined he'd been stabbed, but there was no murder weapon nearby. Wayne was lying face down in the back storage room of the station with a stack of used tires fallen at his feet. There were other signs of struggle in the room, including a battery charger which was tipped over the side near where Wayne's body was found. Before proceeding with the investigation, detectives took a closer look into who Wayne really was. Wayne C. Pratt was born on September 1st, 1939, in Berlin, Green Lake County, Wisconsin, to parents Mr. and Mrs. Clarence Pratt. Wayne and his siblings, one brother and two sisters, grew up in the quiet town of Green Lake. On May 28, 1960, he got married to 19-year-old Marie Pratt, and they gave birth to a son in 1961, Mark Pratt. The small family of three attended the Trinity Lutheran Church, Nina, and lived a simple life. At the time of Wayne's death, he was the owner of the Pratt's Enco service station along Old Highway 41 in Winnebago County, Wisconsin, between Nina and Oshkosh, where he also worked as an operator. That night, police conducted door-to-door interviews, talking to over 75 people and about 25 people taking the lie detector tests. But no one except his wife could say what really happened. The next day, an autopsy was done, which revealed that Wayne Pratt had been stabbed 53 times in different regions of his body, especially the left side, back, neck, and head. Some of the stabs were about 4 inches deep, and 12 of them had punctured his lungs, which had caused both of them to collapse. Medical examiners also noted that he'd been hit on the head with something flat, like a snow shovel. The entrance door to the gas station was taken to a crime lab in Madison, Wisconsin, where it was checked for fingerprints. Everyone who had gone to the gas station between June 12th to 14th, 1963 was fingerprinted, and their samples were checked against those found on the door. However, this led the police to no positive leads. The blood found in the gas station's back room was also analyzed, and investigators found 2 different blood types. One belonged to Wayne, while the other was from an unknown person. Based on this, police believed the unfamiliar blood belonged to the killer, suggesting that they had also been injured during the attack. Based on the multiple attacks, the level of violence, and the blanket used to cover Wayne's body, detectives suggested that the murderer was someone familiar to Wayne and had tried to paint a picture of a robbery case gone wrong. This was due to the fact that the cash drawer at the gas station was empty, except for some spare change, which amounted to $2, when the money in there should have been around $250. A suspect had been arrested days after Wayne's death, but his name wasn't released to the public, and nothing could be proven against him, so he was set free. The police had also given no information on what else happened that night. For the first few years, detectives tried hard to piece the puzzle together, but since there were no tools or technological advancements available to process blood identity in 1963, the case quickly went cold, until a new lead came up almost 5 decades later. In 2011, 48 years after the murder, investigators had reopened the case. By this time, DNA analysis had become fairly advanced and a common practice. As such, the collected blood samples were tested again. Police confirmed that the preserved blood samples found on the crime scene belonged to two different people. And for the next 7 years, they worked tirelessly to identify the origins of the unknown sample. During this time, Wayne's body was exhumed from the Oak Hill Cemetery in Neenah, and a second autopsy was performed. Forensic investigators had taken DNA samples during that process, but the test proved inconclusive due to deterioration. In 2015, Sorensen Forensics, a DNA lab in Utah, found DNA residual samples on the Wayne blanket had been covered with, but it was mixed with other substances, so they were unable to run it through the combined DNA index system database and find a potential suspect.
With our servers designed for AI, you can revolutionize the way you do business, power your workloads, and empower innovation at any scale.
In 2018, investigators had a breakthrough with forensic technology and issued a warrant to acquire the DNA of William A. Dockstader. The 82-year-old was living in Bowler, Shawano County, Wisconsin at the time of this warrant, but he couldn't be arrested because it wasn't only his DNA that had matched during the genetic analysis. Still, this was the second time he was being looked into for Wayne's murder, the first time being in 1963, shortly after the homicide. During that period, Dockstader had told the police he bought gas at the Enco gas station regularly, so he was friends with Wayne. Aside from that, investigators had also received anonymous tips about his involvement in Wayne's death in 1968 and 2011. Witnesses told police that Dockstader had badly needed money at the time since he was getting evicted and needed to pay fines to avoid going back to jail. Other people said that Dockstader's first wife believed he committed the murder and had also seen a bloody knife at their house the day after the murder. But when police confronted her with this information, she denied it. With this information, detectives at the time assumed it was a robbery case gone bad, but they had no substantial evidence to detain Dockstader, so he was let go. Even though there was enough evidence to charge the main suspect, it took Winnebago County Police almost 2 extra years to certify his involvement in the crime without a doubt.
Winnebago County officials say they have a new suspect in the murder of Wayne Pratt at a gas station in 1963. Investigators sent DNA from Pratt's body to a lab, and now 5 years later, the sample has led officials to a suspect, but it's not likely to lead to any sort of prosecution.
During this time, Dockstader passed away, leaving the unsolved questions forever unanswered. In 2024, through cybergenetics, a software company in Pittsburgh, investigators were able to create a TrueLL data analysis from the evidence, which led to the confirmation of William Dockstader as the owner of the DNA found on the blanket. This was in addition to the live witness statements given over the decades.
According to authorities, the DNA evidence, along with reports and witness statements, support the sheriff's office's conclusion that William Dockstader was responsible for the murder.
On July 16, 2024, Wisconsin police officially issued him a posthumous charge for first-degree intentional homicide. Sheriff John Matz of Winnebago County expressed his gratitude to all the labs and agencies that aided in bringing light to Wayne's murder. He also said that Wayne's family would be made aware of the recent development in the case. The Winnebago County District Attorney, Eric Spar, expressed his thanks to the sheriff's office for bringing closure to the case after several decades. He also told reporters that there was enough evidence to pursue a homicide charge against William Dockstader if he'd been alive. Regardless of the suspect's death, it was still helpful to finally uncover the truth behind Wayne Pratt's death. On June 8, 1964, a fisherman found a severed arm in a gravel pit near Tip City, Dayton, Ohio, on State Route 571. Over the next few days, they found several other body parts, including a single torso, legs, and head from the nearby Miami-Erie Canal. The body parts were soon identified to be that of 43-year-old Daisy Shelton. In the following years, the police weren't able to find any leads or suspects in the case. Also, since there were little to no advancements in DNA technology for decades, there was very little police could do to find Daisy's killer. A witness came forward in 2017, more than half a century after the murder, and he informed the police that he'd seen a man striking Daisy before ultimately dismembering her body. Police were quick to find the suspect, but this update raised more questions than answers. In March 2024, the case was brought forward once again. 6 decades after Daisy's death, detectives were finally able to piece together the events that happened that day. However, the outcome was something that no one could have predicted. On June 8, 1964, a fisherman, Robert Johnson, sailing along a river in the east wing of Tip City, Dayton, Western Ohio, made a horrifying discovery of a severed human arm in a gravel pit. Curious but wary, he alerted the police of the discovery before sailing away. A search was then conducted by Miami County Sheriff Chet Paulus to find the rest of the remains, but it was difficult to drain the 50-foot gravel pit, so by the next day, the police were able to find only the other severed arm. 4 days later, another fisherman found a tied-up bag in the canal near the gravel pit. This time, a torso was found inside. The police were called again, and once again, they conducted a thorough search of the area using boats, pumpers, and an array of experienced divers. Over the next 2 weeks, divers found a human head and a leg all in the same waterway and a kilometer away from where the arm was first found. Based on the facial features, Ohio police identified the body to belong to a 43-year-old woman, Daisy Shelton, who had lived in Dayton. Daisy Evelyn Shelton was born on the 19th of February 1921 in Portsmouth, Scioto County, Ohio. She worked at the Dayton State Hospital, Montgomery County, and usually frequented the Lido Bar on Springfield Street in Dayton. Daisy had 2 children, Rita and Rodney, who were already adults by the time she separated from her husband, Harvey E. Shelton, due to his alcoholism. Rodney had joined the Navy after graduating from Kaiser High School and had not seen his mother for several years before her remains were eventually discovered. Before her death, Daisy lived on 4600 Springfield Street and had been recently laid off from Delco, an automotive electronics corporation in the Miami Valley. After the police gathered up the identified body parts, they interviewed her family. Rita Kelly, Daisy's daughter, told the Chief Deputy Steve Lord of the Miami County Sheriff's Office that she'd last seen her mother in late August 1963. At the time, she'd been heading out and said she'd be back to her home in the evening. However, Daisy never returned home. The next day, the family filed a missing person report for her, but for almost a year, there was no update on the case. That was until Daisy's dismembered body was found in June 1964. Between the time of her disappearance in January 1965, 6 months after her body was found, police had interviewed around 75 people who knew Daisy or lived near her in Dayton, including her son, Rodney Shelton. Forensic investigators examined Daisy's remains and discovered that there were wire sutures in her torso, which looked like the ones used in internal surgery. It was later revealed that she'd undergone abdominal surgery shortly before going missing. The ligature marks around her neck and torso area suggested she'd been strangled before being cut up. X-ray analysis showed that she had bone defects, skull fractures, and arthritis in one joint. Based on the level of decomposition, her remains had been in the water for around 6 to 9 months before they were found. Over the years, detectives received information that Daisy had probably encountered a group of people who were trafficking teenage girls for escort work after she was laid off from work. One of the last spots Daisy was seen at was Eastwood Park, which was very popular amongst teenagers and young adults at the time of her death. Investigators appealed to anyone with information on what happened to Daisy to come forward. However, no new leads came up. Examiners pulled up the last X-ray records for Daisy Shelton, which were dated May 29, 1963. Based on this, she was 4 feet 11 inches tall, weighed 98 pounds, and had gray hair. In 2017, someone finally came forward with more details about what truly happened to Daisy Shelton. The witness, who wasn't named, was in the hospital when he confessed to a nurse that he'd witnessed a murder in 1964. The nurse then called the police, who sent some officers to interview him. After his discharge, the man came forward to tell the Ohio police how he'd watched a man attack Daisy with a hammer that day in June 1964 at a home in Springfield Street, Dayton. He described how the scene quickly turned violent, and the attacker had hit her repeatedly with the hammer until she died. Following this, 2 more men dismembered her body and scattered the remains in various waterways around Tip City. Using an age progression tool, the person identified by the witness was detained and interviewed multiple times by police deputies in 2017. He was found to be living on the same street the witness mentioned, and had also been working with Daisy at Delco before her death. Initially, the suspect denied knowing Daisy, but after more interrogation in August 2017, he admitted to knowing her. He also said that a box from his house had been used to carry Daisy's body parts, which was why evidence and his fingerprints could be found on the box. The suspect also admitted that Daisy might have been killed inside his home, causing her DNA to be present in his house. Despite these claims, the suspect, who wasn't named by the police, insisted that he was being framed by the witness. However, he understood why he might appear guilty and could even be charged in court if it came to that. In all of this, he continuously maintained that he hadn't killed Daisy Shelton. Over the next few years, the police tried to ascertain that this suspect was Daisy's killer without a doubt. His lack of a convincing alibi was obvious, and the inconsistencies in his story were damning. They explored possible motives, including a personal vendetta or financial disputes. With advanced forensic technology now available, detectives re-examined the burlap bag that had contained Daisy's torso, the box allegedly used to transport her body parts, and the witness statement. The results found from these analyses, plus the suspect's statement, strengthened the resolve of police that he knew more than he was letting on. However, something happened that changed the course of the entire investigation. In 2017, the witness who had admitted to seeing Daisy's murder was called to the grand jury's office, where he testified against the suspect. However, before the case could be taken to the prosecution counsel, the witness passed away. Still, the police sought answers. A few years later, they were able to identify 3 men who were likely involved in Daisy Shelton's death. Unfortunately, all of them had died before the case could be brought to court. In 2023, prosecutor Anthony Kendall reviewed the case again, including the information gathered from the witness in 2017, the suspect's statement, as well as the evidence gathered so far. Based on all the evidence available, he realized that it would have been enough to move forward with a prosecution where the main suspect could have stood trial. Unfortunately, the suspect had already died in September 2022 at the age of 92. His identity was never revealed. On March 29, 2024, more than 6 decades after Daisy was found dead, her murder was finally marked resolved and then closed, with no one alive to be held responsible for her death. Daisy's granddaughter, Maria Walling, expressed her shock at the vicious crime that had befallen her grandmother at the hands of another human being. She'd never met her grandmother, but she tried to keep Daisy's memory alive through the stories shared by her father and Daisy's son, Rodney Shelton, who died in 2020. "Dad, justice is served," she said. "They're gone, and I pray to God no one ever goes through this, and I'm glad you're with your mom." The Miami County Sheriff's Office talked about how relieving it was to be able to provide justice for cold cases that had long been forgotten. Though police were able to confirm who had killed Daisy Shelton, there was still no motive for the murder. It doesn't help matters that everyone who could have known anything was no more. It's even more tragic that it took the police over half a century to finally close the case. On the other hand, it also gives hope to the families of murdered victims or missing persons who have been waiting for justice for a long time. Regardless, Daisy will be remembered for her kind heart and warm smile. July 10th, 2004 marked the tragic death of Elena Laswell, a resident of Phoenix, Arizona. And just like several other murders that have been committed, the police took quite some time to reach the root cause of it. Elena's murderer remained on the loose for another 20 years. On the evening of that tragic day, Elena had reportedly been in her bedroom. A car had been spotted parking close to Elena's residence, but at the time, no one suspected anything. That was until a call was made to the neighborhood police, and a few minutes after their arrival, Elena was pronounced dead in her own home. Fast forward 20 years, and the mystery that once baffled everyone was finally cracked wide open. July 10th, 2004 was supposedly just like every other normal day for everyone around Elena Laswell, including her family. Elena was in her bedroom that evening when one of her brothers entered, likely thinking she was just taking a nap. However, that wasn't the case. Elena's brother found her unresponsive, and a call was immediately made to the Arizona Police Department and the emergency unit. On getting to the scene, the emergency unit immediately set to work trying to revive the 15-year-old, but all attempts were futile. According to the reports, it had been deduced that Elena had died hours before her body was discovered at 8 p.m. that evening. It was suspected that someone had broken into the Laswell's home to commit the murder. Police also discovered that Elena Laswell wasn't just murdered from the injuries evident on her body. It was deduced that she'd been and from the looks of it, had put up a brave fight before her life was snuffed out. Everyone who knew Elena was as confused as her parents as to why the little girl could even be a target in such an ill-fated situation. Elena Laswell was just like every other ordinary teenage girl on 23rd Avenue, Thomas Road, Phoenix, Arizona. She was a cheerful young lady and was greatly liked by everyone. Elena was born on January 17, 1989, to Steve and Molly Laswell. She was raised alongside her 4 siblings, 3 brothers, Martin, Joseph, and John, and her sister, Katie. Elena attended St. Gregory's Catholic School and Serene Elementary School, and then proceeded to Phoenix Preparatory Elementary, where she graduated in May 2004. Elena would have gone on to attend North High School during the fall of 2004, but sadly, her life was cut short. Elena was a shining light to everyone who came across her. Her family described her as someone who had an enthusiasm for life and brought joy to everyone she came in contact with. Everyone wanted to be friends with her. She had a love for art, animals, team sports, and also a keen interest in jewelry. Her love of art was quite evident in the way she expressed herself. Many had described her as a great poet and a writer with a deep understanding of life. One could say that she was wise beyond her years. On arrival at the murder scene, detectives had taken note of the several injuries on the deceased's face, including that the victim must have put up a fight with whomever got her. However, what the detectives were unable to determine at that moment was whether the injuries on Elena's face were the cause of her death. But that wasn't all that was found on the scene. Elena had also been assaulted. In fact, the police authorities at Phoenix had decided not to release graphic details of the murder scene to the public in respect to the family. DNA samples were taken from the scene, but even with those, the murderer wasn't identified at that time. Elena's murder case had no leads. This remained the status of the case for a very long time. Small dark green or black Ford sedan vehicle, unknown suspect within the ages of 16 and 19. These were mainly what the police had to work with. When the body of Elena Laswell was discovered, forensic DNA examination was conducted, and the several leads on the case pursued were unable to bring out the killer. As a result of this, the Arizona Police Department went out of their way and had sought external help. An external investigative unit, known as the Silent Witness, was invited to partake in the case. Several flyers that had a sketch of a possible suspect were sent out to the public, and this was accompanied by the announcement of a $1,000 reward. However, even with all these efforts, nothing was found. Thus, for the next couple of years, the case went cold. However, the investigators involved were still not willing to back down. They were willing to search every part of the country, and even outside it, for Elena's killer. The years after 2004 witnessed the advancements of technology, and DNA examinations also reaped the rewards of these advancements. By 2012, detectives involved in Elena's murder case decided to re-examine the collected DNA. By making use of advanced DNA examination techniques, coupled with further research, investigators were finally able to make some headway. In March 2013, the DNA analysis was confirmed and a lead suspect was finally identified, Sergi Francisco Reyes. Shortly after a name was identified, things had sped up as a grand jury involved in the case indicted Sergi Francisco Reyes, setting the stage for a trial. But Sergi wasn't anywhere to be found, and the only lead on his whereabouts at the time was that he was somewhere in Mexico. Thus, in March 2014, an extradition process to seek out Sergi from Mexico began. However, March 2014 was still far off from the date when the killer was finally found. The following 10 years for the investigators involved in the case were focusing on finding Sergi Francisco Reyes. Finally, on July 10, 2024, with the help of the U.S. Marshals, the murderer was found. It took 20 years to finally bring the murderer into police custody, and as if it were Providence in action, It had happened on the 20th year anniversary of Elena's death. 37-year-old Sergi Francisco Reyes was immediately transferred to the Maricopa County Jail to face his sentence. He was faced with 1 count of first-degree murder, 2 counts of assault, kidnapping, and second-degree burglary. Although just 17 at the time he committed the murder, Sergi was still charged and is set for a court appearance later in 2024. A bond of $1.5 million was set for Sergi Francisco Reyes, but there isn't any indication that a lawyer would defend the killer in court. Steve Laswell, Elena's father, had expressed more relief in stopping the killer from causing more harm by getting him arrested rather than getting back for Elena's murder. Finding the killer had finally put the deceased's family to rest. According to Elena's aunt, the family wasn't bent on avenging Elena's death. All they wanted was for the killer to be found so he wouldn't harm anyone else. She wanted him to be caught so he couldn't hurt anyone else, Katie Tourville, Elena's aunt, had said, in reference to what Elena's late mother would have wanted.
That sense of security, of well-being, of protection was on shaky ground. But the fact that they caught the guy on the same day that he did this to her, it just feels good.
Katie Tourville also believed that discovering the killer's whereabouts, even after 20 years, simply meant Elena's spirit was finally at rest. Finding the killer had not only been a relief to family and friends, but also to the investigators involved in the cold case. It took a while, but through perseverance, hard work, and dedication, we were able to get Sergi Reyes back to Phoenix to face charges, Phoenix Police Department Detective Dominic Rostenberg said. It had taken 20 long and hard years, but those years hadn't been a waste. Against all odds, justice managed to prevail, bringing peace to Elena's soul and family. On the morning of February the 11th, 2020, neighbors were shocked to find 29-year-old Alex Andrea Liddy dead in her Hyde Park View apartment at 10 Moore Street, Malden, South Carolina. Before the police came in, people from other apartments had gathered and started asking questions of their own. After some investigation, it was discovered that Alex had been missing for 2 days before she was found dead. The condition in which she was discovered was suspicious, making police rule the place as a crime scene. They started the investigation, but were unable to continue it at the time because of the outbreak of the coronavirus pandemic. The case soon turned cold due to the lack of suspects and motive. No one knew when and where Alex had gone out or when she came back home before she was found dead. All the while, Alex's family begged for answers. However, in August 2024, more than 3 years after the murder, detectives finally pieced together the story behind Alex Andrea Liddy's death. On February 11th, 2020, the Malden Police Department received a phone call from an apartment building at number 10 Moore Street, Malden, South Carolina.
The Malden Police Department was called to the Parkview Apartments where they tell us they found 29-year-old Alex Liddy dead in her bathtub.
When they arrived at the scene, a small crowd had already formed at the doorway of apartment number 46 because of the amount of water that was coming out of it. After dispersing the crowd, police tried to enter the apartment but found it locked. They quickly broke the door down and went inside, only to find a deceased woman whom they identified as Alex Andrea Liddy. 29-year-old Alex was found inside her bathtub, partially dressed, covered in vomit, and with bruises all over her body while her shower ran on the other side. The Greenville County Deputy Coroner, Jennifer Kaysen, was called in to investigate, after which Alex's death was ruled as a homicide. Alex Andrea Liddy was born on July 11, 1990, to her mother Andrea Johnson. After her death, she was cremated by the South Carolina Westville Funeral Home. Malden police made sure to secure Alex's body before moving it out for an autopsy and forensic report. Medical examiners at the Greenfield County Coroner's Office ruled her death as a homicide due to blunt force trauma to the head and mouth, as well as a partial submersion in water. A toxic screening analysis also detected a number of drugs in Alex's system, which may have contributed to her death. Some of the drugs were heroin, methamphetamine, alprazolam, and cocaine, among others, and the volumes of these substances found in her bloodstream were way above the legal limit. Investigators collected a lot of items from the crime scene, including clothing and potential DNA swabs from her vomit and dried blood. An assault kit was also used during the autopsy, but its results weren't released. The main issue with Alex's case was that investigators had no idea where she'd gone between the night of February 9th and the morning of February 11th when she was found dead. According to her family, she was in contact with them on the night of February 9th before she logged out of her social media, and they never heard from her again. Also, the fact that she was half-dressed with only her undergarment and a sock on her left foot made detectives suspicious of foul play. Alex also had recent bruises, lacerations, and abrasions all over her body, like she'd been repeatedly beaten with an object during the assault. In addition, investigators noted that her hair and face were wet when police found her, but there was no water in the bathtub. They drew up ideas on whether she died moments before she was found, or whether her killer might have set it up to seem that way. However, one thing was certain. She died within the last few hours, and someone out there knew what happened. But because of the lack of evidence, nothing substantial was uncovered. The Malden police conducted interviews, and Alex's mother told them that her daughter had struggled with drug addiction, but she'd been sober for over a year. This gave police even more reason to believe that someone else was involved in what happened to Alex. However, there wasn't much that could be done on the murder case, as there were very in her system, and she'd been beaten repeatedly before her death. The Malden police, as well as Alex's family, continuously asked the public to come forward with any information they had on Alex's disappearance or death, but there was no positive response. The outbreak of the coronavirus pandemic by the next month, March 2020, also made it difficult. For the next 3 years, the case went cold, and Alex's killer walked free. During this time, Alex's mother continuously expressed her sadness and regret that her daughter's killer had not yet been found. She engaged in various interviews with reporters and on TV broadcasts, asking for anyone with more information to come forward. In September 2023, Detective Jenna Wilson took over Alex's case, and a few months later, a surprising twist developed. After the new detective took over the case, she went through all the evidence previously gathered, including crime scene photos and body camera footage from February 2020. She also sent the assault kit conducted on Alexandria Liddy for review to the Greenville County Crime Lab, and after a few months, it came back with a match. After more than 4 years, the suspect was finally going to be brought to court. On August 1st, 2024, police arrested 44-year-old Derek M. Williams for the death of Alexandria Liddy. During questioning, Williams initially revealed that he and Alex were close friends, but gave no further information on what happened between them. Detective Jenna explained that while Williams's actions during the incident directly contributed to the 3 causes of Alex's death, there was no evidence to show that it was intentional. In light of this, the Malden Police Department charged him with involuntary manslaughter due to the evidence that was found, which showed that his actions were negligent and fully showed a reckless disregard for the victim's safety. According to police reports, Williams had always been a person of interest in the case during the initial stage of the investigation, but recently, further evidence that put him at the crime scene was found.
He was a person of interest, and then further evidence just presented itself where we were able to get probable cause.
However, Malden police refused to give any more information on what helped them get Williams into custody. Records also showed that Derek M. Williams had been arrested in November 2023 for the illegal possession of drugs, and he had a surety bond of $75,000 on this charge. For the involuntary manslaughter charges, an additional cash bond of $175,000 was placed. This was to ensure that achieving bail for him would be difficult. He's currently detained at the Greenville County Detention Center and is awaiting an official court trial. Alex's mother, Andrea Johnson, told reporters about how hard it was to wait for the moment her daughter would get justice.
She was the comic of the family, very empathetic. Any underdog, she would sit for hours, just an incredible giving human being.
However, she expressed relief that everything had been resolved now. Andrea also talked about the moment they announced Williams as her daughter's killer.
Disbelief, just how do you adjust to that, especially something you never thought would come.
Detective Jenna talked about how she developed a personal relationship with Alex's mom, which gave her the drive and determination to keep the case moving until she and her team finally solved it.
Having a relationship with the victim's mom definitely gave me more drive as well. You know, seeing the struggles that she went through of 4 years with no answers, and, you know, at some point in time, she felt like there was no hope and there was never going to be any answers. And being close with her and communicating with her definitely left an impact on me.
Though justice has been served for Alex's death, her family will forever grieve over her loss, especially as 2 of her sisters died in 2020 as well, mostly due to emotional damage from the heartbreak of losing Alex. This case just goes to show how far the side effects of substance abuse can push a person, as well as the need for people to say something when they see something. Despite the fact that the Malden police have not said much about the case or what led to the suspect's arrest, one can conclude that the toxic effects of these drugs contributed greatly to Alex's demise. Regardless, Alex will always be remembered for her giving heart and compassionate smile. This is Sanford Police Department Chief Cecil Lee Smith addressing the press about the arrest of a cold-blooded killer who went unpunished for 25 years. On July 18, 2024, however, the borrowed time of this murderer's freedom came to an end. The Sanford Police Department in Florida's Seminole County arrested the suspect for the savage killing of Sherry Holtz on December 3, 1999. The discovery of her corpse on the morning of December 4th gave a Sanford citizen a horrifying shock as he found Sherry with her neck almost completely severed and her body lying discarded in the woods near her house. But despite the best efforts of the initial investigation, the case went nowhere. The investigators reopened the cold case in May 2023 to try and get her justice. But little did they know that it would just take the magnification of a small detail to finally solve a case that had dragged on for a quarter of a century. On December 4th, 1999, an environmentally conscious citizen was roaming the woods of Sanford and picking up cans in the forest. However, they were stunned to discover a horribly killed woman's corpse. The authorities were informed, and a police team soon arrived at the crime scene. The visual of a partially undressed woman lying on a concrete slab about 20 feet into the wood line made the blood of the investigators run cold. An uncovered body in the unforgiving cold of December, with its head almost chopped off, was a sight that even the most seasoned detectives were not prepared for. Identification was initially difficult, as she lacked any form of ID on her. Further investigation revealed that the 50-year-old woman was a local, Sherry Holtz, who lived nearby along with her boyfriend Gary Durantz and 3 other roommates. Scouring the bloody crime scene, the police found a lock blade knife near Sherry's body. The forensics later confirmed that this was the weapon used to murder her. The autopsy also revealed that she'd also been strangled and suffered severe blunt force trauma along with clear signs of assault. It was unclear who murdered Sherry and how many people were involved in the case. Moreover, it was also puzzling to see her so far out in the woods, away from her place. Retracing her steps, the police found that Sherry wasn't alone before she was killed. The investigators discovered that Sherry was last seen at a bar named Uncle Nick's on the night she was killed. According to the people present there, 2 people were seen leaving the bar as soon as Sherry walked out. However, the witnesses couldn't pinpoint when she left, stating that Sherry could have left anywhere between 7:30 p.m. and 11 p.m. that night. The 2 people who left after her were later approached by the police and questioned about Sherry. While their identities were never disclosed, they were seen as persons of interest who could have murdered Sherry during the course of the investigation. The police tried to connect them with the murder weapon found near the dead body. The forensics found 2 different blood samples on the knife. While one of them belonged to Sherry, the other sample couldn't be identified. The amount of residual blood on the murder weapon was too small to be used to determine who it belonged to back in December 1999. The Sanford Police Department chose to store and preserve the sample for future testing. Just when it seemed that the case had hit a dead end, the police found that a 3rd suspect could also have killed Sherry. In fact, this 3rd person was none other than her longtime boyfriend, who had already laid hands on her before. The police traced Sherry's residential address to Crow's Bluff Lane, Sanford, and questioned the people who shared a home with her. Investigators noted that she lived with 4 other people. One of these people was Sherry's boyfriend, Gary Durantz, who stood out the most after the police interviewed everyone. According to his statement, he'd not seen Sherry after December 1st, 1999. However, his roommate said that Gary was not only home at this time, but he had also had a fight with Sherry. The roommate said that the fight was so bad that Gary kicked Sherry out of the house. In their opinion, however, this was a merciful act since he had a bad history of physically abusing his girlfriend as well. This was also confirmed by several police records between 1996 and 1999 that showcased Gary's history of violence towards Sherry. Sherry's roommate said that they saw Gary leaving the house in the late hours of December 3rd. They also noted that he returned between 2:30 a.m. and 7 a.m. on December 4th. While this window matched the time when Sherry was murdered, nothing could be pinned on Gary without concrete evidence. Thus, this information didn't elevate his status higher than that of any of the other 3 suspects in the case. But Sherry's roommates also noted that Gary seemed to be already aware of Sherry's murder even before its investigation began. At last, the police had no more leads to work on, and the only possible answer to the case lay in the unidentified blood sample. Hence, Gary remained a free man. Despite the best efforts of the Sanford Police Department, the case ultimately went cold and was shelved. However, this wasn't the end of Sherry's story. Fortunately, the next time police reopened her case file, they were ready to pen its final chapter owing to a big breakthrough. The cold case of Sherry Holtz's homicide was reopened in May 2023, almost 24 years after her vicious murder. This time, however, the police had the necessary forensic equipment to track down her killer. After over a year of hard work, the investigators were finally able to nab the culprit who had coldly knifed and beheaded Sherry to death. It was someone all too familiar to the investigators, Gary Durrance. Speaking at a press conference on July 19, 2024, Sanford Police Department spokesperson Bianca Gillett revealed the news of Gary's arrest. Bianca explained the nature of the crime and how terrifyingly Sherry was murdered, along with how and why the police arrested Gary.
We are Hispanic, and we are proud of what we become.
Food, welcome to the familia.
The cold-blooded killer, who was also 50 years old at the time of Sherry's murder, is now 74 years old.
She was found laying on her back on a concrete slab approximately 20 feet into the wood line. Her clothing was pulled off, exposing most of her body. Her throat was cut. That was determined to be the primary cause of death. However, there was evidence of strangulation and blunt force trauma. Both of those were just as significant that could have resulted in her death in isolation as well. A sexual assault kit was performed at the time. It was negative for any DNA evidence found during that processing of that kit. There was also a lock blade knife located near the body. There was human blood present on that knife. It was sent away for testing at the time, and actually in 2000. And the test indicated that there was human blood. However, the samples were so small at the time, they were not sufficient in size for testing.
Bianca noted that Gary's arrest immediately ended the suspicion surrounding the other 2 suspects, since only his DNA was found on the knife, apart from Sherry's. Following this, Gary was arrested from Orange City in Volusia County with the help of the Volusia County Sheriff's Office and 2 of their narcotics task forces on July 18, 2024. Along with Bianca, Sanford Police Department's Chief Cecil E. Smith also spoke to the media. He said that he hoped that Gary's eventual arrest would help deliver some peace and calm to Sherry's family.
Again, we just kind of hope that that this brings some peace to the family, knowing that an individual who was a longtime boyfriend will spend the rest of his natural life in jail and have the opportunity to face justice for the things that he has committed to Sherry.
Bianca noted that Gary had acknowledged his involvement in the murder. Interestingly, however, he has been arrested for second-degree murder. The arrest is still fresh, and thus the Sanford Police Department is yet to make a lot of details public. Right now, Gary's being held at Seminole County's John E. Polk Correctional Facility. His jail records say that he'll face the first day of his trial on September 10th, 2024. Although it's yet to be determined what his punishment would be, the police have put a cold-blooded killer behind bars after years of hard work. January 13th, 2013 is a day that would forever be etched in the memories of the Georgia police because it was the day they stumbled upon a gruesome scene on the side of Interstate 85 in Union City, just outside Atlanta. An abandoned Dodge Charger, its once shiny surface now dulled, held a dark secret. Looking in, they found the lifeless body of 32-year-old Cheryl Colquitt Thompson, 33-year-old Quinones King, and 43-year-old Rodney Cottrell lying cold and still.
Oh my God, 3.
As detectives unraveled the mystery, they discovered a tale of unimaginable horrors. The victims had been threatened, tortured, and murdered in a different county before being left to rot more than 20 miles away from home. For more than a decade, the investigation persisted with no resolution in sight until a breakthrough finally emerged in 2024. On that cold, windy day of January 13th, 2013, at around 5:45 a.m., Union City police officers were patrolling the Interstate 85 section in Fulton County, Georgia, when they came across a stationary vehicle at the northbound exit ramp to Flat Shoals Road. Curious, they approached the silver 2010 Dodge Charger that looked abandoned. It looked like it had been there since the night before and had a putrid odor coming out of it. When policemen looked inside, they were shocked at what they discovered. 2 people lay dead in the back seat of the vehicle, their bodies covered with a blanket. After bringing them out, police had decided to check the trunk, and they found 1 more body stuffed there. The bodies were identified to be 2 males and 1 female, Quinones King, Rodney Cottrell, and Cheryl Colquitt Thompson. Cheryl Colquitt Thompson was born on May 29, 1980, to Charlene and Matthew Lewis. She left behind her husband, Alhanda Willie Thompson, and her son, Keziah Colquitt, along with 2 stepdaughters, Jana and Takira Thorne. Aside from her family, Cheryl was known to love writing poetry and traveling. She was attending junior college to become a pediatrician and also was fighting with her son's cerebral palsy. Quinones King was born in 1980 to parents Rosetta and Antonio Colquitt. Quinones, along with his brothers Martin King, Malcolm King, Kavius Sims, Alton Edwards, as well as his sisters Charlene Lewis, Natasha King, Pamela Williams, and Carolyn King, all grew up close-knit in the town of Montgomery. At the time of his death, Quinones left behind 2 sons. Rodney Cottrell was born in 1970, and he was the youngest out of 11 brothers and sisters. The trio all lived in Montgomery before their untimely and tragic deaths. At first glance, it was easy for police to see that these people had been assaulted and tortured. Their bodies were completely bare, and parts of their skin had become purple from bruises and scars. Investigation showed that they'd been lured to a duplex home at gunpoint on Magnolia Drive, Jonesboro, in Clayton County. Evidence from medical examiners, including the victim's blood, showed that the trio were beaten and tortured in that house on the evening of January 12, 2013. From the marks on their bodies and the autopsy conducted, it was determined that Cheryl was killed by ligature strangulation, while Quinones and Rodney were killed by asphyxiation, which is a lack of oxygen in the body. Later on, their bodies were transported in the Dodge Charger and dumped near the interstate, about 15 miles away from the house they were tortured in. During the interviews with family, police discovered that on January 12th, a day before they were found dead, Cheryl had traveled to Atlanta with her uncle Quinones and her friend Rodney. None of them knew why the trio made the trip, but they believed that it was a setup and that they'd been lured there. Lakita Lewis, Cheryl's sister, also told police that the Dodge Charger actually belonged to Cheryl. At first, police had multiple persons of interest in the case who were interviewed, but due to a lack of information and evidence, nothing came up. No substantial DNA was found at the crime scene, and even those found were mixed up. On January 24, 2018, 5 years after the triple murder, the victims' families came out again to ask for help in getting justice for the deaths. A $1,000 reward was promised to anyone who could give out any useful information in catching the killer, but no one came forward. And with that, the case went cold for a second time. For over a decade, the case remained unsolved with no new leads and no information. In 2024, the Clayton County Police Chief, Kevin Roberts, decided to reopen the case. Using forensic genealogy, he was able to analyze the DNA found on the bodies and compare it to a criminal database. Luckily, there was a match. Or rather, matches. In May 2024, 4 suspects were found. 49-year-old Kenneth Thompson, 45-year-old Keontae Harris, 51-year-old Kevin Harris, and 31-year-old Daryl Harris. Though their names were similar, police refused to say whether Keontae, Kevin, and Daryl were related to each other by any means. However, they did admit that Kenneth Thompson was also related to Cheryl, as well as the Harris brothers. On May 8, 2024, the Clayton County Sheriff's Office obtained warrants for the 4 men. In less than 2 days, through May 14th to 16th, the elite fugitive unit of Clayton County apprehended all 4 of them across the states of North Carolina, South Carolina, and Alabama. One of them, 45-year-old Keontae Harris, was the assistant principal of Macadori Middle School and special education teacher in Jefferson County, McCalla, Birmingham, Alabama, where he'd been working since January 2023. He was booked into Jefferson County Jail to await trial, and as soon as the arrest was made public, he was placed on administrative leave. A day after, he voluntarily resigned from his position as principal. The other men were placed in custody in Georgia and South Carolina, awaiting their movement to Clayton County for the trial. Keontae Harris made his first appearance in an Alabama courtroom on May 14, 2024, and he seemed emotional as he stood before Judge William Bell Jr. to sign his extradition papers in order to release him to the Georgia police authorities. His mother and other family members were also present at the hearing. The 4 men were charged to court for 3 counts each of malice murder, amongst other charges, making their case to have a total of 12 counts. A court date was set for May 28, 2024. But as of July 2024, no new news has come out for the case, and police have remained tight-lipped about the progress of the case, including the motive for the murders or giving the evidence that led to the arrests. After the arrest, the family of the trio murder victims came together in remembrance. Holly House, Quinona's sister and Cheryl's aunt, described Quinona's as the knee baby in her big family, silly and fun-loving. He was the glue that held our family together, she said. Rosetta Colquitt, Quinona's mother and Cheryl's grandmother, revealed that she'd never given up hope of getting justice. She also expressed gratitude to the Clayton County police investigators for all their efforts. Lakita Lewis, Cheryl's sister, who's now taking care of Keziah, her nephew with cerebral palsy, told police how relieved she was that they could finally put a face to whomever did it.
9 rows across.
Quinona's cousin, Valencia Hogan, also told reporters that though the killers had been arrested, there was still a long way to go before justice could be fully served. Central Alabama Crime Stoppers Director Tony Garrett said this case was one of the first cases he'd worked with and is hopeful justice would finally be served. He talked about how they started a prayer vigil every year for the victims and their families. One of the most surprising things about this case is that one of the killers actually had access to children and had the very profession of guiding and teaching young minds about right and wrong. 3 people were viciously torn away from their families without reason or thought, yet we cannot fully tell why or how it truly happened. 2 able-bodied men were beaten and strangled to death. One can't help but wonder what was the reason behind torturing and killing 3 innocent people. Shout out to these incredible true crime lovers. Your support truly keeps us going. To the rest of the Mysterious 7 family, if you want to get in,
I can't hear you too well. Are you listening to an audiobook? That's what I'm hearing. I'm not hearing you actually. Okay, no, I'm not on an audio. I'm watching a video by Nick. But I don't have YouTube Premium, so therefore I get the commercials. And no commercials and no good. Can you hear me now? Florida Char, as in Florida Char, me.
One's breathing. Bust that window out. Alright.
Oh, Charlotte?
Oh, yeah, they're all pretty young.
Charlotte?
Jesus Christ. This is the worst I've ever seen.
On the morning of July 31st, 2022, a jogger in Strongsville, Ohio, stumbled upon a gruesome car crash at the intersection of Progress Drive and Alameda Drive.
You called it in?
Yeah, I saw it. I was coming back from breakfast. Okay. And I pulled up to the corner there.
Okay,
And
we
saw
appreciate you giving us a call.
someone in it, obviously.
Yeah.
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 Oh, that front end.
They definitely hit it hard.
You all can hear me.
Right.
All right. Well, what a way to start your Sunday. I guess better than theirs.
This was a clear summer morning in July. It was not raining. The roads were dry. The car looks like it's exploded.
The car was a wreck. Its front bumper had torn off, and the hood was crumpled like a crushed soda can.
For just a matter of seconds, it's going at an incredibly high rate of speed, just a white blur like a missile.
I'm not here to talk. I'm stitch.
They were Davian Flanagan, 19, Dominic Russo, 20, and Mackenzie Shirilla, 17. Tragically, Davian and Dominic were pronounced dead at the scene. Mackenzie survived, but was critically injured. She was then rushed to the hospital in a helicopter. Police initially assumed it was just teenage recklessness. But shocking phone data revealed that one of the occupants had been in the same desolate area just 3 days before the crash. With this revelation, the situation took a darker turn. The driver's speed hinted at something more sinister. The fact that someone recently visited the location had now transformed this tragic incident into a chilling mystery. Before getting into the details of the tragic crash, it's important to understand the ties between these three young people. Mackenzie Shirilla and Dominic Russo were young lovers who lived in the Cleveland suburb of Strongsville, Ohio. The two had started dating in 2021. Alongside them was their classmate, Davian Flanagan, who was Dominic's new friend. The night before the crash, the three were at a party where they'd been smoking weed. Around 5 a.m. on their way home, Davian asked Dominic and Mackenzie for a ride. Mackenzie hesitated, claiming they were in a hurry and couldn't wait for him. Despite this, Dominic insisted, agreeing to drop Davian off. Little did they know, it would be a journey with no return. Following a wild night of partying, the three friends packed into Mackenzie's Toyota Camry on July 31st, 2022, ready to get home safely. Mackenzie, just 17 years old, drove with Dominic by her side and Davian in the back seat. Around 5:30 a.m., they were driving on Progress Drive in the Progress Drive Business Park at a normal speed, and everything was all right up until then. However, some things seemed off. She noticed that
All right, how about this? I am making a scarf. Can you hear me now, Miss Char? Okay, now, I was making a scarf. It's about 5 feet long in length. I don't count stitches, because for what? If I'm making a dress, then I need to count stitches. For scarf, no, thank you. 5 feet long, 9 rows across. And there you go. Awesome possum. Do you knit, Mrs. Charles? I'm going to get back to knitting before I lose all my wheels. I'm not sure if you were telling me are you doing a scrap blanket or Afghan? Okay, Char. I says I be making a scarf. Char. I'm going back to work. Char. I turned off the audio in my background just so you can hear me say I was making a scarf. Have a nice day, Miss Flora. Char.
Dominic and Davian were dozing off frequently and abruptly decided to take a completely different route, steering them away from where Davian needed to go. But when they turned onto Alameda Drive, something went wrong. The car suddenly sped up to 100 miles per hour and crashed into a building. Police discovered the car crash happened around 5:34 a.m.
No one's breathing. Sarge, we're good to try to get her out? Dude, I don't know what's going on there.
I don't feel anything. I don't feel pulse.
She's breathing. I saw her stomach. Her stomach's.
Oh, yeah.
Grab everything over here. We'll just take it back to the property room. What did you take the whole bag? Yeah, throw it all in there. Anything relevant?
It took about 45 minutes for someone to find the crash and call 911.
Popeye's Wings are the official wing of watching football. Win the wing game every week with 7 signature flavors, including new sweet and smoky chipotle. We don't make sense, we make chicken.
Have that chicken from Popeyes.
A new era of color is here. Color FX by Impress. The no-glue mani, just press on and done. Lasts up to 7 days with super hold adhesive. Elevate your look with Color FX by Impress. Get yours today at impressbeauty.com.
I was the one that called it in.
You called it in?
Yeah, I saw it. I was coming back from breakfast.
Okay.
And I pulled up to the corner there.
Okay,
And
we
saw
appreciate you giving us a call.
Yeah. Someone in it, obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
that's a bummer. I didn't want to get stuck, and I'm like, I don't know what's going on.
Right. No, I appreciate you giving us a call. Absolutely appreciate it.
They fucking were hitting it, man.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, because I saw that front end
They definitely hit it hard.
destroyed.
Right.
All right. Well, what a way to start your Sunday. I guess better than theirs. Huh?
Right. I appreciate the call, sir. Thank you.
Mackenzie's memory of the incident was hazy. She claimed to have blacked out during the incident and couldn't remember what happened. Suspicion hung heavy in the air, and this left the families of the victims on the edge. As investigators pieced together the events and found there was more to the story than met the eye. But the police faced another daunting task, notifying the families of the 3 individuals involved in the accident. Starting with Mackenzie, who had just been rushed to the hospital, all the parents initially knew was that their daughter had been in a car accident. However, soon after, the police delivered the devastating news.
What did they tell you? Nothing. Okay. She was life flighted here.
Yeah, I wouldn't know that.
Okay. No. You want to sit down?
Oh my God.
The way to say this. Progress in Alameda, car into a building. 2 are deceased in the vehicle. Daughter's driving.
Who died?
I don't know whether, but one that we don't know. His name's Jacob. Does anyone know Jacob?
Dom?
No, stop. Let him talk.
Guys, I know, we've been dealing with this. Your daughter's okay. She's talking to us. I talked to her, okay? Your daughter's alive, okay? Your daughter's alive. She was driving the vehicle, okay?
Who's that? Jacob and who?
I think, what's the name you said?
Dom?
Might be.
Oh my God.
Stop.
What's his relation to you? Okay, yeah, then Don was in the car.
Are you kidding me?
It's right now, it's an ongoing investigation. Speed is definitely a factor. So are drugs.
With the blood test results pending, rumors swirled through the town. Some believed it was a tragic accident, while others suspected something darker at play. And one key detail came into the picture: Mackenzie and Dominic's toxic relationship. Mackenzie and Dominic were the picture-perfect couple on social media. Every post overflowed with happy selfies, entwined fingers, and playful captions. They seemed to have everything: young love and a bright future ahead. But later, when police interviewed Mackenzie's ex-boyfriend, a different story emerged from beneath the carefully curated online persona.
So, how long were you guys in a relationship, you and her?
Well, we were all friends in a friend group at first. I ended up dating her for a little bit, like probably over the summer. I was only dating her for probably like a month and a half or like 2 months. And then me and Dom that she was cheating on us basically, but it wasn't like anything official, so it wasn't no hard feelings. Like whatever happened, I just kind of was like, after me and Dom found out about that, we had no problems with each other and nothing, but they were on and off, and I kept on talking to her still while they were on and off, because we were all still in the friend group and stuff. So, and then we kind of just like stopped being intimate, you know what I'm saying, and we're just friends.
It clearly wasn't the fairy tale their social media presence portrayed. They'd break up in dramatic fights, only to get back together weeks later with apologies and promises. This on-again, off-again cycle became a familiar pattern and left those close to them worried.
That long, but like friend-wise, like she was crazy. I've personally been told that she did voodoo on him. She has told people that she's put a spell on him so that he couldn't break up with her. That she had like grabbed a piece of his hair, and that she had a doll in her room for Dom, and that she had literally put a spell on him, is what she would tell everyone. And, like, she truly believed in that kind of stuff. And she also uses the pendulum, I know too, to try to get answers. But she tries to use it now to talk to Dom. But it's like, I feel like that's what she was trying to do, was crush the car into the wall.
After this, detectives also found out that Mackenzie had previously threatened to key Dominic's car and also crash her car with him in it, much prior to the accident. This behavior led police to believe that there was something more sinister hiding. The investigators then found another interesting detail. There were drugs found in Mackenzie's car. Earlier to this, Mackenzie was also seen bragging on TikTok about her drug obsession. The discovery of mushrooms in the car added another layer of mystery. However, these weren't detected in her blood test. Her blood test revealed the presence of THC in her system, which was a different drug, the psychoactive compound in marijuana. This meant she was likely high at the time of the crash. This left investigators to wonder what role the drugs might have played, if any, in the tragic events that unfolded. The presence of drugs, along with Mackenzie's erratic behavior, painted a truly disturbing picture. In order to reconstruct the events before the accident, detectives were thankful that Davian's phone was connected to Life 360, a safety app that continuously tracks its user's location. Fortunately, 2 of his friends were also connected to the app, providing the police with valuable information as well.
It's a recording. Does that play? So, I mean, what does it mean? Or just screenshots?
It's just a tracker. Yeah, it's like my parents have me in a circle so they can see where I go, and it just follows you wherever you go. And Davion had us.
Oh, explain.
So this is when they were going down Progress Drive, and then you know how there was like tire tracks before it, like on that side grass. So that's the sign.
That's when it hits the side.
And then that's where she curved exactly right on.
Gotcha.
Missed those 2 rocks and went right into the sign, the side of it. But I'm just confused on how the back of the sign was messed up. But she went right into that wall.
Right.
No, so you can see like the hard braking was right at the wall, and then her high speed after the hard braking was 90 miles per hour.
However, another friend of Dominic, who is also on Life 360, offered a perspective on how to interpret the evidence from the app.
To me, right here, if you looked at the tracks, and you guys probably have pictures of them, it looks like the person in the front seat tried to turn the wheel because of the fact they were going to go straight into a wall. And it doesn't say she hard broke once. It was 90 miles per hour down that whole road. And I also think because of Kenzie's and Dominic's history, that they were fighting. I think Davion went on his phone to distract himself from the fighting. Although they were on drugs, they can also still be fighting with being on drugs.
It could have just been like a careless mistake. Like I don't think Kenzie, even if she was like at road rage or she was arguing, I don't think her intention was to kill 2 people no matter what.
While the investigation continued, Mackenzie was on her own journey to recovery. After the crash, she had broken her arm, had a concussion, and even her legs had multiple fractures. The doctors had to operate on her arms and legs, but her injuries were severe, and because of this, she stayed in special care for weeks. After healing, she was taken to a rehab center where therapists helped stabilize her legs and arms so that she could move around. Even though the accident was serious, she had managed to heal completely over time. But little did Mackenzie know, a far worse fate was waiting for her, something that would turn her world upside down. Approximately 3 months after the crash, her life took a dramatic turn. On November 4th, 2022, Mackenzie found herself in handcuffs.
Where's she? Right back there, pal.
I would definitely recommend SUNY WCC Mount Vernon to anyone that wants to start over. It's the place to be. Warm, welcoming, and you're learning. I'm grateful for WCC because they're sending me on my way.
My name is Dotsie Bausch, and today I'm asking for the standalone dairy category to be removed from the dietary guidelines to accommodate the wide array of populations and cultures that make up this great country.
Hi, Mackenzie. Step out for me. I'm Detective Jesus. I'm the one who's been investigating the crash. You're under arrest for aggravated murder ×2, okay? Nobody's gonna ask you any questions. Nobody's gonna bother you. Can I have your key, please?
Could you please be careful taking this one off so it doesn't break the bracelet, please?
You got it. You got it.
According to court papers, she was facing a staggering 18 charges, each one heavier than the last. These included charges for aggravated murder, felonious assault, and aggravated vehicular homicide, all stemming from the tragic crash on July 31st, 2022.
Mackenzie? Okay, Mackenzie, I want to take your handcuffs off. I need like all the jewelry and everything to come off, okay?
I can't wear any of it.
No, I need you to take it off while you're in jail right now.
But the list didn't end there. Mackenzie also faced charges for trafficking and drug possession related to the magic mushrooms discovered in the car. Another charge was for possessing a digital scale labeled as possessing criminal tools. In total, there were 15 charges linked to the crash and the deaths of her friends. The other 3 charges were for allegedly breaking into the Columbia Church of God in Columbia Station on July 19, 2022. The accusations included breaking and entering, vandalism, and desecration, all of which painted a very disturbing picture of her personality. Mackenzie's bail was set at $500,000, but she remained behind bars in juvenile custody since she was a minor at the time of the incident. The once carefree teenager now faced a future filled with uncertainty. The charges against her were significant, which could even lead to a potential life sentence. By March of 2023, a twist emerged in Mackenzie's legal standing. Having just turned 18 on August 2nd, only 2 days after the crash, she was now considered an adult in the eyes of the law. This meant her case would be transferred to the adult justice system. Knowing this, her parents rushed straight to the station to confront the stark reality. Sirs.
But I need to speak to my daughter because you guys aren't allowed to speak to her at all. That's from the lawyer. All you guys did this on the weekend is just, what you like to do is go, hey, there's a warrant for her. We would have brought her right down here with no problem. Unbelievable. I mean, he's 18.
So the warrant was issued today, so we...
Well, you could have made a phone call, couldn't you? You had your creeper out in front of my yard watching.
So, she can't take any, she's an adult, she can't take any phone calls right now.
Okay, well, I still need to speak to my daughter so she understands what her, not to say anything to you guys. If he had to roll out the whole mask to pick up an 18-year-old girl who could hardly walk out of a hospital, it's just beyond me.
So we follow the law, that's what we're doing today.
Am I going to be allowed to have a 2-minute conversation with her?
You cannot talk to her about these.
Why doesn't she get a phone call? If you arrest her, why don't she get a phone call?
She was just brought in. They're going to process her. As soon as they get the time for her to make a phone call, she will be able to make a phone call.
She's a lawyer. She does have a lawyer.
She is 18 years old and she can speak that.
Yeah, but she's a dumb 18-year-old that just turned 18.
Well,
and this guy's going to take advantage of her. She's not allowed to speak to you guys. I'm telling you that.
Her attorney can call us.
Don't ask her any questions.
Her bench trial was scheduled for August 7th, 2023, just 5 days after Mackenzie's 19th birthday. The prosecution's opening statements revealed evidence from Mackenzie's vehicle's black box, which indicated a shocking speed of 100 miles per hour. They also had proof capturing the entire sequence of events. One video showed her driving at a normal speed during a turn. Here, her blinker was on and was signaling the right direction she was going in. This indicated that the vehicle was not completely out of control the entire time, and that the crash was intentional. They also presented the video of her speeding down the road while vanishing from view and ultimately crashing. But the prosecution didn't stop there. They also showed her toxic behavior through a video where Mackenzie could be heard threatening her boyfriend. This evidence was confirmed by Dominic's older brother, Angelo Russo.
She mentioned that anytime Dom would kind of want to break up with her, she kind of would go crazy. Describe crazy, like what kind of crazy?
Like there is times where she called Dom and said, if you break up with me, I'm going to, word for word.
What do you think happened?
That I think,
yeah,
off of what I know and off my assumptions, Dom tried to break up with her multiple times, even in July. They kept not like working out, whatever. They kept making back up. Kenzie's known to be the kind of person that she's let us know she will never let go of Dom. And if she has to let go of Dom, she will not go on living herself. To me, it seems like they were in a fight. I think that she took it upon herself to purposely crash into that wall.
I'm in your car if you not let me in the house. You're going to keep my car. If you don't let me in the house, yes.
Then Dominic's friend, Christopher Martin, testified about a disturbing incident that happened 2 weeks before the crash. On July 17, 2022, while driving with Dominic, Mackenzie threatened to crash the car. Dominic contacted for help, and that's when Christopher rushed to pick him up. While on the phone, he heard Mackenzie's threat where she said, "I will crash this car right now." Moreover, they revealed that Mackenzie had visited the crash site just 3 days prior, supported by data from her cell phone. This indicated prior knowledge of the area and implied a calculated plan. The prosecution presented disturbing glimpses of the defendant's behavior. Shortly after her hospital release, police received videos in which Mackenzie was seen attending a concert while being in a wheelchair.
I'm introducing these to the court to show the shocking lack of remorse. This was something that was being exhibited while the investigation was still going on, before she was charged and arrested in November of last year.
Furthermore, Mackenzie was observed to be active on TikTok even after the tragic incident. On Halloween, before facing charges, she made transition videos with her friends. But Mackenzie's mother, Natalie Shirilla, stepped forward to share a different narrative before the court.
It's Halloween. You've been laying for 3 months crying, only listening to his music. Please go have just a moment of fun. A moment of fun. So we told her to go. My husband drove her. I brought her back home. She just needed a second of fun from losing her whole world. Her whole world. So that was us. We told her to go. And that concert she went to with Dom's cousin, Abby, they picked her up. They brought her there. That was Dom, Mackenzie and Dom and Abby all decided to go to this concert together while they were in the hospital. That was for Dom. Everything she did after the accident was either in honor of him, to be close to him, or just to be by him any way that she can.
Natalie further revealed that Mackenzie suffered from POTS, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, which is a condition known to cause dizziness and other debilitating symptoms. She also addressed the families of the victims, where she expressed regret.
I just want to say to the families that I'm broken, sad, and lost, and my heart hurts for everyone, okay? Davian was her new friend, and Dom was the love of her life, and he was part of our family, okay? I'm just so sorry that this happened, and we're heartbroken, okay? For 3 months crying, there was a shrine of him next to her with photos and things that he liked, and this flower that lights up that he got her because he wanted it to be fresh and alive forever. It's like a little Beauty and the Beast flower. Okay, she's got this shrine of him next to her.
When Dominic's mother, Christine Russo, took the stand, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted.
But this was not a car accident. The evidence and science proved that Mackenzie Shirilla murdered my son, Dominic, as well as Davian. No one can imagine the pain of losing a child unless they have lost one themselves. The pain is forevermore. Time does not heal this wound. Mackenzie, going to prison because you did this. Be thankful that you're still alive and have a future, whatever that may be. Dom and Davian were robbed of their futures, their hopes, and their dreams. Mackenzie showed no mercy on Dominic, nor did she on Davian. Only God at this time can have mercy on her soul. Thank you.
Then Dominic's older brother, Angelo Russo, stepped forward. He revealed a shocking statement Mackenzie made immediately after the crash.
Mackenzie's statement in the hospital to Detective Azu, "Can't you just take my license away for 10 years or something?" That statement is Mackenzie Shirilla. The most selfish person I know. Ironically, Dom was the most selfless person I know. She was driving, going to concerts, and dressing up for Halloween. No thoughts of the families and lives that she had destroyed.
Later, Davian's mother, Jamie Flanagan, also took the stand to speak about her son.
So many dreams shattered, a future stolen. We will never get to see the amazing man that he was surely to become. I pray daily for strength and perseverance for myself and for my family. I also pray that Mackenzie will find true remorse in her heart and true repentance. We thank all of those that worked so hard to help us bring justice for our son.
After the conclusion of all the testimonies, the courtroom braced for the final verdict. But there was one last person who was left to speak.
Big Apple Academy, where excellence becomes tradition. Elementary and junior high schools, advanced programs in English, math.
The families of Dom and Davian, I'm so deeply sorry. I hope one day you can see I would never let this happen or do it on purpose. And to my family, thank you for the support and all the love you guys give. Thank you for fighting with me. I love you all so much. I'm done. Thank you.
Everybody waited for answers. Would Mackenzie escape the clutches of justice, or would she finally be held accountable for her actions? In the end, justice prevailed as the judge delivered the verdict on August 21st, 2023.
The defendant controlled all the events. She chose the day. Specifically, she chose a day just before her 18th birthday. She chose to drive the car, the time to drive the car. She chose an obscure, previously scouted route through an industrial parkway. She chose the target to hit and the victims. She chose the means and the method to follow through. And she planned and purposefully executed the events of July 31st, 2022.
She was sentenced to 2 concurrent life terms with a possibility of parole after 15 years during her sentencing hearing. She was found guilty of 4 counts each of murder and felonious assault, as well as aggravated vehicular homicide and other offenses.
I understand that the pain in this room wants me to impose the harshest sentence. But I don't believe that would be the appropriate sentence, because I do believe that Mackenzie will not be out at 15 years. So she's sentenced on count 2, the murder of Davion Flanagan, 15 years to life. She's sentenced on count 1, the murder of Dominic Russo, 15 years to life, to be served concurrent to each other, with credit for time served.
We are just thankful that we feel justice was served today. There's not a day that goes by that we don't miss our son, and justice was served for him today. But honestly, there's no winners here. There's no winners here today.
Despite the sentencing, it's hard to overlook the actions of Mackenzie Shirilla that led to such a tragic outcome. Her reckless decisions not only ended the lives of Dominic and Davion, but also shattered the hopes and dreams of their families. While the sentencing of Mackenzie Shirilla brought a measure of closure and justice to the grieving families, it can never undo the irreversible loss of Dominic Russo and Davion Flanagan.
I pulled your car over because it matches the suspect. Get your hand in your pocket. What are you, crazy? Get over here. Hey, get over here! Go and run! Hey, I'm gonna release the dog!
This is 24-year-old Nathaniel Rowland, and as he tried to flee from the police, this would prove to be his biggest mistake. When officers searched his car, they found several alarming items which were pointing towards something sinister. He immediately became the prime suspect in Samantha Josephson's case, who was last seen outside Bird's Dog Lounge. But the situation became even more disturbing when her friends made this 911 call.
911, what's your emergency?
Hi, we were just gonna call to let you know our friend is missing. We went out in 5 Points last night, and...
Well, we're listening to 5 or 8 most disturbing cases you've ever heard. True crime.
She still hasn't made it home. Her phone's dead.
On the evening of March 28th, Samantha was feeling down after receiving some bad news from home. Seeking comfort, she asked her boyfriend, Greg Bishley, to come to the University of South Carolina, USC, to spend the night with her. Unfortunately, Greg was already busy. He graduated the previous December and lived with his family in Charleston, South Carolina. Although he often made the 2-hour drive to Columbia to see Samantha, he turned her suggestion down this time because both of them were already planning to meet up in a couple of days for a trip together. Greg suggested that Samantha should go out with friends to lift her spirits. He reassured her they could stay in touch through texts all night, as he was just a phone screen away. Samantha took his advice and went out, hoping to distract herself. Little did anyone know that this decision would lead to devastating consequences. Samantha and her friends decided to head to 5 Points, a lively area in Columbia known for its vibrant student scene. This spot was a favorite among USC students because it's so close to campus and filled with shops, restaurants, and bars. Samantha and her friends often hung out there, and it was actually the place where she first met her boyfriend, Greg. That night, Samantha got ready in a pair of black pants, platform sandals, and a bright orange top that made her stand out. Before hitting the bars, the group stopped at their friend Edgar's house. They spent some time there before making the short 2-minute walk to 5 Points. Everything was going as planned. After leaving Edgar's house around 12:30 a.m., Samantha and her friends walked straight to the Bird Dog Lounge, a popular bar in 5 Points. The Bird Dog was one of their favorite places to hang out at night. It was always buzzing with students, and the lively music together with cheap drinks created a lively, fun-filled atmosphere. However, even with the excitement around her, Samantha's friends noticed that she still wasn't in the happiest of moods. The worries she'd shared with Greg earlier in the evening seemed to be weighing heavily on her mind. As Samantha sat in the corner of the bar, she kept messaging Greg and others on her phone. Despite the efforts to distract herself, Samantha couldn't shake off her sadness. Then, later in the night, she accidentally got separated from her friends, which made her even more alone and upset. So, around 2 a.m., Samantha decided to call it a night, headed home and called Greg to let him know. Living a couple of miles away on Main Street, she ordered an Uber for a safe ride back to her apartment. This decision marked the beginning of a fateful night that would change everything. At 2:06 a.m., Samantha was still on the call with Greg as she waited for her Uber ride, and Greg was keeping her company virtually. Suddenly, after about 12 minutes, Samantha's Uber driver arrived. The driver pulled into the disabled parking bay, but before the car could fully stop, Samantha leapt towards it. She flung open the passenger door and hopped inside. Within seconds, the car door closed, and it sped off towards the southeast on Hardin Street. However, Greg quickly sensed that something was amiss with Samantha's trip. Despite their recent phone call, he began tracking her using the Find My Friends app installed on their phones for safety. This app allowed them to monitor each other's locations in case of emergencies or concerns. Suddenly, Greg noticed that Samantha's Uber ride was heading south, away from her home, which was located north of the 5 Points area. Being concerned, he immediately called and texted Samantha, but received no response. Trying to stay calm, Greg considered the possibility that Samantha might have changed her plans and gone to Edgar's house or to another friend's place. He hoped that Samantha was safe and simply forgot to respond, but he couldn't shake off the growing worry in his mind. Greg made every effort to reach Samantha, using various communication methods like calls, texts, and even Snapchat. He wanted to ensure that everything was all right before jumping to conclusions. Despite his persistent attempts, Samantha didn't respond, and time continued to pass without any word from her. Greg's concern grew as he anxiously waited for any sign of Samantha's safety. Now, Samantha usually had her receipts turned on, so Greg could see when she read his messages, but now they remained unread. Despite Greg's attempts to reach out, there was no clue of Samantha. Meanwhile, her location kept moving in the totally opposite direction from her apartment, heading southeast through neighborhoods like Shandon and Rosewood. Then at 2:30 a.m., a sudden and alarming event occurred. Samantha's location stopped updating altogether. This was completely unprecedented since the time Samantha and Greg began their relationship. Her location abruptly halted when she was on Montgomery Avenue, about 3 miles away from the 5 Points area. Fearing the worst, Greg reached out to Samantha's friends and roommates, only to discover that they hadn't realized she was missing. Since Samantha shared her location with her friends too, they all checked and saw that her location had also stopped around Montgomery Avenue. Immediately, they decided to drive to the area to search for her, but despite their efforts, they couldn't find her, nor did anything around seem suspicious. However, they did notice an old abandoned house nearby, along with a sorority house next to it. There were a few cars parked around, but nothing else seemed out of place. They began to speculate that Samantha might have left her phone in the Uber, and perhaps it had died, explaining why she couldn't respond to calls or texts. They were convinced that Samantha would have made it home safely and was probably asleep, so they reassured Greg not to worry. Being relieved, Greg eventually fell asleep, thinking Samantha would surely connect with them in the morning. As the night wore on, Samantha's friends and roommates returned home, unaware that Samantha hadn't made it back yet. It was nearly 5 a.m., and after a night of heavy drinking, they weren't thinking clearly.
Love, Cypress.
It's time. One roommate noticed.
Casual knitter, you making a flower? No, really, what are you making?
Samantha's bedroom door was open, indicating she hadn't returned, but being too tired to dwell on it, they all went straight to bed. When they woke up around 10:30 a.m., they noticed Samantha's door was still open and her work shoes were out. It was concerning, especially since she had a waitressing shift that morning at the Liberty Tap Room. Her roommates immediately called the restaurant to check on her, but the staff confirmed that none of them had seen Samantha that morning. This was unusual because Samantha was responsible and would never miss work without giving notice. Her failure to show up without a call raised a major red flag for her roommates that something was seriously wrong. Meanwhile, Greg also woke up and checked his phone, realizing that he hadn't received any messages or calls from Samantha. Panic set in as he called their roommates, who delivered the chilling news that Samantha was missing. Without wasting a second, Greg jumped into his car and sped back to campus, a 2-hour drive that felt like an eternity. On the way, he also called Samantha's parents to break the horrifying news. Their fear was palpable over the phone, and they immediately decided to drive down from New Jersey, facing an agonizing 11-hour journey to find their daughter. Meanwhile, back at the campus, Samantha's roommates, overwhelmed with concern, made the difficult decision to call 911 at around 12:30 in the afternoon to report Samantha as missing. The police swiftly arrived at the girl's apartment after the call to gather updates on everything that had transpired since the previous night.
911, what's your emergency?
Hi, we were just gonna call to let you know our friend is missing.
What's that? Where are you located?
1426 Main Street.
Is he missing from his address?
We went out in 5 Points last night, and she still hasn't made it home. Her phone's dead. We don't think she, went home with, a guy or anything. We're, actually, worried. So, she missed work this morning.
Alright, what is her name?
Samantha Josephson.
Samantha, what's her last name?
Josephson. Josephson.
And how old is she?
21.
And you remember what she was wearing?
She was wearing a bright orange shirt with black pants.
And y'all was in 5 Points, you say? Last seen in 5 Points?
Yes.
Alright, we got it. So we're going to send the officer out there so y'all can make that report, okay?
Okay, thank you so much for the help.
You're welcome, no problem.
Soon after, Greg also arrived and was eager to assist in the investigation. He shared all he knew with the police, while detectives diligently noted down the information provided by both the roommates and Greg. With a plan in motion, the detectives left the apartment to begin the search for Samantha. As for Samantha's friends and Greg, they were already assuming that the Uber cabs would be tracked down in no time, but no one expected the twist that was about to come. When the police left, the roommates decided to explore Samantha's computer, hoping to find any helpful clues. As they scrolled through Samantha's email, they stumbled upon a shocking discovery. An email from Uber notifying her of a ride cancellation charge. The email indicated that the Uber driver had a charcoal gray 2011 Dodge Charger. This revelation raised a crucial question. If her Uber ride was canceled, then how did Samantha leave that night? To unravel this mystery, her friends decided to return to the Bird Dog and review the CCTV footage of the streets. Thankfully, the manager knew them, so he granted them permission for the investigation. So as they scrutinized the CCTV footage, bustling with people chatting and strolling along the sidewalk, Samantha stood out in her bright orange top, eagerly awaiting her Uber. But to their surprise, instead of the expected ride, she entered into a black Chevy Impala around 2:09 a.m. It was evident that this was a completely different car from the one she was supposed to take. Whose car was it? And why did Samantha get into the wrong one? To gather answers to these questions, they retraced their steps to Montgomery Avenue, knocking on doors and inquiring if anyone had seen the car or Samantha the previous night. But despite their efforts, they came up empty-handed. So the friends wasted no time and headed straight to the police, armed with all the clues they gathered. As the authorities reviewed the CCTV footage from every angle, they stumbled upon something unsettling. The same car had been lingering in the area for a considerable amount of time. What's more, after spotting Samantha alone, it made a deliberate U-turn before picking her up. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together, which painted a disturbing picture of premeditation. The police quickly issued a bolo, a be on the lookout for any black Chevy Impala, mobilizing law enforcement to stop and investigate any vehicles matching the description. Officers were on high alert, hoping for a lead that could bring Samantha home. However, before they could gather any information about the car or its driver, they received a call that sent a wave of dread through the department. 14 hours after Samantha had gone missing, a disturbing report came in. A man named Anders Sullivan Lee, out turkey hunting with his friend Ryan Knowlton near Tuberville, South Carolina, had made a horrific discovery. He went to an area called New Zion, about 78 miles east of Columbia, and as they walked along a secluded road, Anders noticed something unusual in the bushes. Moving closer, he was horrified to discover a human body covered in blood and immediately called the police at around 4:20 p.m. When the police arrived, investigators quickly began examining the scene. During their initial search, they found several disturbing items scattered on the ground: an envelope, cigarette butts, and beer cans. The body found was that of a young woman covered in blood and mud, with numerous stab wounds all over. The gruesome scene suggested to investigators that she'd been dumped and dragged there. However, the lack of a significant blood trail or other evidence indicated that the crime had occurred elsewhere. Investigators were soon alerted about a missing college student from Colombia, and it didn't take long for them to identify the body as that of Samantha Josephson. Her remains were carefully removed from the scene for further examination. What they'd uncovered next would horrify everyone, revealing the full extent of the cruelty she'd suffered. The pathologist who performed the autopsy on Samantha's body stated that using a two-bladed knife, the killer inflicted about 120 stab wounds on Samantha. During the vicious attack, she would have tried to protect herself. One of the stab wounds went completely through her right hand, likely as she raised it to shield herself. Another stab was so forceful, it penetrated her skull and reached her brain. The killer also struck her carotid artery, a major vessel that supplies blood to the head. Many wounds, especially those on her right neck and shoulder, were clustered closely together, suggesting rapid, frenzied stabbing. Samantha also suffered a severed hyoid bone, as well as stab wounds to her face, neck, shoulders, torso, back, lungs, legs, and feet. She bled heavily and, tragically, died within 10 to 20 minutes from her injuries. Who could harbor such hatred for Samantha to kill her so terribly? As Samantha's parents were traveling, the police contacted them with the devastating news of her death. The news of Samantha's death shattered her parents' world, as they were still holding on to hope of finding and bringing home their daughter safely. It only took a few minutes for their lives to be completely changed. Still, to help with the investigation, the police asked Samantha's parents if they had access to her bank account. After some consideration, they provided all the necessary information. This step was crucial for the investigation to progress, as it could provide important clues about Samantha's movements before her tragic end. When investigators looked into her bank account, they made a startling discovery. Her card had been used at 2 different ATMs in the area on March 29, 2019. The first attempt was at 5:45 a.m. at an ATM in Sumter, South Carolina, which was roughly an hour's drive east of 5 Points. Interestingly, Sumter was located halfway between 5 Points and the area where Samantha's body was later found. Just an hour later, at 6:47 a.m., there was a second attempt to use Samantha's bank card. However, both transactions were denied, and no money was withdrawn from Samantha's account. With this new lead, the police contacted Wells Fargo, Samantha's bank, and were connected with a financial crimes investigator to dig deeper into these transactions. That investigator somehow was able to obtain footage from both ATMs, and what they saw was chilling. In the footage, it could be seen clearly that a figure approached the ATM dressed entirely in black. He wore a hoodie, a black jacket, and gloves, with the hood pulled tightly over his head, and something was covering his face. This was a crucial piece of evidence, and the police wasted no time in releasing these images to the public. They urged anyone who recognized the individual or had any information about him to come forward. While they couldn't be certain if this person was Samantha's killer, they believed that he could provide vital clues to solving the case. It didn't take long for them when, at around 3 a.m. on March 30th, 2019, police officers Jeremy Crav and Justin Nissia were patrolling the 5 Points area.
Yo, let me get a TVs, bro.
Yo, Central 1 and 5.
They spotted a black Chevy Impala cruising around and remembered the bolo issued earlier. Suspecting it might be linked to the case they were investigating, they decided to pull the car over. Initially, the man behind the wheel seemed cooperative. However, when they asked for his identification, he claimed not to have any, which grew suspicious. So, to clear their doubts, they requested him to step out of the car because they detected the smell of marijuana. But things took a sudden turn when the man, instead of complying, attempted to flee from the police.
All right, here's the deal, man. I pulled your car over because it matches the suspect. Get your hand in your pocket. What are you, crazy? Get over here. Hey, get over here. Go and run. Hey, I'm gonna release the dog. I can't. I was just gonna see if he'll stop. Bravo Mike wearing a gray sweatpants, gray sweatshirt.
Just a few minutes later, the police caught him and brought him back to the car. Meanwhile, another officer searched the vehicle and made some disturbing discoveries. They found a large amount of blood, not only in the trunk, but also all over the passenger seats. This was alarming enough, but then they found Samantha's mobile phone in the glove box, officially linking the man to Samantha for the first time. The search also uncovered liquid bleach, germicidal wipes, and window cleaner, indicating an attempt to clean the vehicle. But the most disturbing details were yet to come. The suspect, quickly taken into custody, was identified as 24-year-old Nathaniel Rowland. He had every reason to be worried, as the evidence against him was mounting rapidly. Born in 1995, Nathaniel Rowland grew up in New Zion, about 65 miles southeast of Columbia. He attended East Clarendon School and graduated in 2012. His coach remembered him as a great kid from a very involved family. However, his recent years were less positive. He had several traffic violations, mostly for not wearing a seatbelt, and was charged with having an open container of alcohol in February 2018. But there was a more serious crime linked to Nathaniel. On October 19, 2018, he was allegedly involved in a carjacking at a traffic light. Along with another man, they abducted a woman, assaulted her, forced her to drive to an ATM to withdraw all her money, and then to her home where they stole items, including a PlayStation 4. Hours later, Nathaniel sold some of those stolen items at a pawn shop. In no time, investigators tracked the items back to him, and he was arrested and charged with obtaining goods under false pretenses valued at $2,000 or less. Surprisingly, he wasn't charged with a carjacking or kidnapping, which might explain why he felt emboldened to commit another offense. However, all the remaining doubts vanished when investigators searched Nathaniel's house. In the trash can behind his home, they found blood-stained clothing, cleaning supplies, paper towels, gloves, and a multi-purpose tool, commonly known as a pocket knife, covered in blood. The gloves contained both Samantha's and Nathaniel's DNA. Additionally, the blood on the clothing items and the knife closely matched Samantha's DNA. Despite the mounting evidence, one question lingered. Why was Samantha's DNA never found on Nathaniel himself, and why did he have no cuts or scratches on his body? However, this was soon dismissed. The blood in the back seat and trunk of his car matched Samantha's, and her fingerprints were found on various items in his possession. With all this evidence, it became clear to investigators that Nathaniel was linked to Samantha's horrific murder. The combination of DNA evidence, bloodstains, and fingerprints made it easy for the investigators to connect him to the crime. Finally, Nathaniel was charged with kidnapping, murder, and possession of a weapon during the commission of a crime. His trial began on July 20th, 2021, and it did not go well for him. Prosecutors called 31 witnesses to testify, including the turkey hunter who'd found Samantha's body, Nathaniel's former girlfriend, Maria Howard, and numerous state law enforcement investigators and other experts. These witnesses provided crucial details and evidence that painted a clear picture of Nathaniel's involvement in Samantha's horrific death. The testimony and evidence presented in court made it difficult for Nathaniel to defend himself against the charges. During the trial, CCTV footage was shown in court revealing Nathaniel's disturbing actions before Samantha's abduction. The footage captured him stalking the 5 Points area as early as 25 minutes before he picked up Samantha. He was observed prowling the area multiple times, even circling around the bird dog bar, seemingly searching for a potential victim. When Nathaniel saw Samantha alone and attempting to get into another vehicle, mistaking it for her Uber, he seized the opportunity. His Chevy Impala, just 2 cars behind, allowed him to act quickly. After Samantha entered his car, Nathaniel activated the child lock, trapping her inside and preventing her from escaping. The CCTV footage also showed Nathaniel's car traveling southeast, with cell tower data confirming that both Samantha's and Nathaniel's phones were together during this time. This evidence suggested that Samantha was likely killed in the car before her body was transported to the field where she was found. Furthermore, the testimony of turkey hunters describing the location of Samantha's body supported this theory. Additionally, Nathaniel's attempt to withdraw money from ATMs using Samantha's debit card after the murder further incriminated him. These details provided a clear sequence of events leading to Samantha's tragic death. Throughout the entire trial, Nathaniel appeared uneasy, constantly taking notes and showing signs of discomfort. Finally, on July 27, 2021, Nathaniel's fate was sealed when he was found guilty of kidnapping and murdering Samantha Josephson.
He is guilty of murder. He's guilty of kidnapping. He's guilty of possession of a weapon during the commission of a violent crime.
The jury, after deliberating for just an hour, reached their verdict. Nathaniel's actions and the overwhelming evidence presented during the trial left no doubt about his guilt in the horrific crime. Nathaniel received a life sentence for his crimes, but was that enough to bring closure? Samantha, with a promising future ahead of her, had her life tragically cut short by an opportunistic killer whose motives seemed to be financial gain. Samantha's fatal mistake was getting into a vehicle with an unknown driver without verifying their identity first. Her parents were devastated by the loss of their daughter, but from their pain, they established the What's My Name Foundation. The foundation's mission is to educate people about rideshare safety. Samantha's case also led to the passing of Sammy's Law in New Jersey, which enhanced safety protections for both drivers and passengers using rideshare services.
Samantha was by herself. She had absolutely no chance. None. The door was locked. The child safety lock was on. She had absolutely no chance in this. If there's somebody else in the car, there's actually a chance.
This legislation, bearing the same name, was signed into law at the federal level by President Joe Biden on January 5th, 2023. Through these actions, Samantha's legacy lives on, making rideshare services safer for everyone. What are your thoughts on this case? Was really only financial gain the reason behind Samantha's murder? What further steps can be taken to prevent similar incidents and ensure the safety of passengers and drivers using rideshare platforms?
So what are we missing right now that you know of?
My wife's jewelry box. All kinds of rings in there.
So somebody had to know where the jewelry box was.
Where did you say your son is? We don't know. Well, I call his work, and he's not scheduled to work today. We called.
And he goes to voicemail, you said, when you called him?
Yeah, he was turned off. But his car's gone, but his wallet and his driver's license, there's no money in the wallet.
What you just saw was a routine call, which soon turned into one of the most shocking cases ever seen.
We're here in Orange County, New York.
On June 27, 2016, in the tranquil town of Santa Clara, Utah, officers from the Santa Clara Ivins Police Department responded to a seemingly typical property theft report on Meadowview Circle. Upon arrival, officers were met in the driveway by Kenneth Heisler and his neighbor.
I came home from work. I left at 3:30 to go to work. I come home about 2:30 today, and pulled in the garage, took a shower, went to the pool, came back into the house. I noticed that my wife's stuff is missing, and the iPad's missing. And I checked the front door. The deadbolt still has a deadbolt on it, and no one has a key for that deadbolt.
Now, more disturbingly, there was something that looked like bloodstains on the garage floor and in the kitchen. Kenneth's son, 32-year-old David Heisler, was nowhere to be found. His car was gone, but his wallet and driver's license were left behind. And the red stains added to the growing alarm. Now, Kenneth continued to guide the officers through his home. He mentioned the fact that David loved movies and video games, pointing out that the TV was still on with the video game paused. It looked as if David had heard something and stepped away mid-game. His phone was left behind, charger in place, and his wallet where he usually kept it. Every clue suggested an abrupt departure. Now, initially, Kenneth speculated that his son might have taken some items to a pawn shop, as David had a history of being a bit deceitful for some extra cash. Kenneth showed the officers where the missing iPad and jewelry box were usually kept, adding more pieces to the puzzle. However, the presence of blood in the abandoned wallet contradicted this theory. As disturbing as these findings were, nothing could prepare them for the horrific revelation hidden within the depths of David's life. In order to get a better idea, they needed David to be there. They needed to speak with him. But where was he? Meanwhile, the police had started to get a background on David, trying to see if he had any potential enemies who could harm him or kidnap him, considering the bloodstain in the house. They wanted to know if he had any friends who came over often.
Does he have any friends that come over very often?
He's in a bitter divorce.
Well, yeah, he does.
Custody battle.
He just won custody over his daughter, over the mom. And some of the characters she hangs out with are pretty bad.
In jail, drug use.
Yeah.
Now, looking into David's past, the cops uncovered more about his relationship with his ex-girlfriend, Kelly Marie Perry, and their now 6-year-old daughter, Mariah Heisler. David and Kelly began dating in 2009. According to David's stepmother, Debbie Heisler, David habitually never introduced his girlfriends. However, one day, she received a call from a family member congratulating that she was going to be a grandma. That's when Debbie decided to meet Kelly. When she met Kelly, she found her to be very polite. Debbie observed that Kelly and David did everything together. When Kelly gave birth to their daughter, Mariah, David was thrilled to be a dad. However, when Mariah was around 3 years old, David and Kelly started having issues, leading to Kelly's eventual departure. Kelly had a history of associating with people involved in criminal activities, including drug use and jail time. The custody battles seemed to have strained the relationship between David and Kelly further. David had been awarded custody of Mariah just 2 weeks before his disappearance. The fact that David had just won custody of Mariah could have been a tipping point. So, did Kelly or someone she knew have a hand in David's case? Or, most importantly, did the custody battle have some role in this? As the officers went into David's past and his relationships, they realized they needed to track down every person connected to this case. They needed to speak with Kelly, her friends, and anyone who might have had a reason to harm David. Christian Wormsley, a St. George private investigator hired by Kenneth to work on behalf of the Heislers in the child custody case, had the same stance. Frank McCard was one of the names that had struck the cops as they went deeper into David's case. Given the custody battle between Kelly and David, it fits perfectly among his potential motives for his disappearance. They'd attempted to locate his vehicle for a welfare check to make sure he's okay, and they also tried pinging his phone to see if they could locate him that way, but it hadn't been powered on at all that day. Meanwhile, Kenneth mentioned that Kelly had called him saying that the cops had called her. She said that David had texted her last night asking her to come over. And Kelly's statement didn't seem to be true. Both Kenneth and his wife couldn't digest why David would call Kelly over to his house. The cops checked the pawn database. Usually it takes a couple of days for it to update, but he only used to pawn at one place. And when they contacted that pawn shop, they said they hadn't seen him that day of June 27th, 2016. Debbie, David's stepmother, had posted on Facebook about his disappearance, expressing her concern. And throughout the times, she mentioned a gut feeling that something was wrong. The following day, officers returned to the residence to continue their investigation. One officer pointed out a chair with David's hair on it, raising concerns about the presence of electrical tape. He noted how the tape was pulled and that there were long hairs on it, suggesting they'd take it as evidence. Kenneth remained worried, stating he hadn't been able to contact David on his phone. He shared that after talking with the police the previous night, he spoke with Kelly, who claimed that David had texted her at 3:49 Monday morning, asking if she was coming over.
What are you thinking at this point? I still haven't been able to get hold of David on his phone. After I talked to you last night, I did talk with Kelly, and she said that David was texting her that night and wanted her to come over. She said she wouldn't.
Went to the house to talk to her today. There's a text from David at 3:49 Monday morning asking, you coming over or what or not? If not, I'm going to bed.
Yeah. That's basically what she told me. She said that they were texting. David wanted her to come over, but she didn't.
Right.
The officer noted the blood in the garage, suggesting someone might have been thrown into a trunk, but clarified that the blood splatter didn't indicate a high-impact injury. It seemed more consistent with a bloody nose or a small cut rather than a significant injury. Given the circumstances, the officers decided to issue another attempt to locate David's vehicle and list him in the National Crime Information Center database as missing. They explained that if any contact was made with David anywhere, he'd be flagged and they'd be notified. Also, both Kenneth and Debbie noted David's unusual silence, especially since he'd been in regular communication with Mariah via FaceTime and Skype. The officers returned 30 minutes later with the detective to collect a blood sample from the garage. The officers asked if there'd been blood there before, and Kenneth confirmed there hadn't been.
Has there been blood here before?
No, it wasn't there Saturday. It wasn't there Sunday morning at 3:35 a.m. when Kenny went to work. It was there. It wasn't seen this morning.
Now, putting it all together, Kenneth, Debbie the neighbor, and the officers were contemplating a theory about what might have happened to David, given the bloodstains and his abrupt departure from the house. They speculated that David might have opened the door to let Kelly in, only to be ambushed by someone hiding around the corner. Kenneth suggested that this could have happened in the middle of the night after he left for work at 3:35 a.m. He confirmed that David was still there when he left, as the car was in the driveway and the video game was on pause. They guessed that David was overpowered quickly, which might explain the blood splatter near the door. At this time, the intruders might have freaked out after attacking David, grabbed some valuables, and then moved David's body to the garage. They speculated that the intruders then backed the car into the garage, loaded David into the trunk, and drove off, leaving the house locked up behind them. But despite their fears, Kenneth expressed a hope that David might have taken some belongings and left on his own, although he admitted that their private investigator was less confident. He believed that David's car might already be in Las Vegas, with David possibly in the trunk, hinting at a more dire situation. The Heisler residence is situated in a cul-de-sac, being the only two ways to exit the neighborhood. This added another layer of complexity to their theories, as it limited the possible routes the intruders could have taken when they left with David in his car. So, in order to look into it, detectives had obtained surveillance video from the two directions David's car could have traveled. David drove a black 2002 Saturn sedan, and at 4:56 a.m., a sedan matching his vehicle was seen exiting the neighborhood. The video was grainy, so detectives couldn't determine the occupants of the vehicle. Next on the investigators' list was the person with whom David had last communicated. They obtained call logs from Kenneth, revealing that David had been messaging his ex-girlfriend, Kelly. Kenneth left for work at 3:30 a.m., and David sent his last message at 3:56 a.m. The timing of the messages was significant because exactly 1 hour later, David's car was seen leaving the neighborhood.
Woo! Come on! I say you gotta get her right.
No.
2 days after David went missing, Captain Rich Rogers and Lieutenant Jiren Studley went to Kelly's house to discuss David's disappearance. Kelly explained that she had sole custody of their daughter until September 2014, when she got married and moved to Cedar City. She married James Perry, and David came to her house a week after the move, taking their daughter on an ex parte motion of custody. They had recently had a trial related to this custody battle. Kelly claimed that Debbie, David's stepmother, had pushed David to fight for custody because Debbie didn't want Kelly to move Mariah to Wyoming.
So tell us about custody just real quick so we can try and make sure we can answer your
Okay,
questions.
so I had full custody of her until September of 2014. Yeah, 2014. September 2014, I got married and moved to Cedar City.
Who did you marry?
I married James Perry.
James Perry.
And David came to my house a week after we moved to Cedar City and took her on an ex parte motion of custody, and we just barely had our trial.
Who's pushing for all this? Is it Debbie?
It's Debbie. Debbie's the one that has pushed all this because I was trying to move home to Wyoming where my family's at.
Mm-hmm.
And Debbie wasn't okay with that because then she wouldn't have Mariah close by. She pushed David into, well, you can't let her take her. You can't let her take her. David actually got kicked out of his parents' house Easter of 2013, I believe.
For what?
They fight all the time. Him and his parents are constantly back and forth with each other over something because he lives at home and his parents want control over him.
Mm-hmm.
They treat him like he's a teenager again, you know? So Debbie told him to get out of her house on Easter.
Kelly recounted that David had been kicked out of his parents' house in Easter 2013 and had come to stay with her for about 2 weeks. They'd split up a couple of months before, but Kelly allowed David to stay because he watched Mariah while she worked. David had written a letter agreeing to Kelly taking Mariah to Wyoming, but during the court hearing, he claimed not to know about the letter. Kelly further asserted that Debbie manipulated David by threatening him with the loss of his place to live, car, and phone if he allowed Kelly to take Mariah. Despite David being 30 years old, Kelly described the ongoing conflict as being